Good evening. Dr. Kasrirangan, chief guest of today's special panel, former presidents of INAE, members of the Governing Council, fellows, young associates, awardees of Indian National Academy of Engineering, ladies and gentlemen, and members of the press. We are indeed pleased to organize and hold this special session on national education policy as a part of INAE's 36th Foundation Day and also INAE's 75-week-long celebration of Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. Education is a backbone of any learned society. As the premier and the peer body of engineering technology of the country, Indian National Academy of Engineering primarily focuses on policies related to engineering and technological intervention, future predictions, and pursuing certain initiatives of national and international importance. Education is no less important. We have decided that as a national body, we would today devote this panel discussion primarily on implementation of a National Education Policy 2020 only in the engineering and technological domain. Of course, engineering cannot be divorced from humanities and many other disciplines, but the focus is on engineering and technology, and the focus is on implementation. We are extremely privileged to have with us Dr. K. Kasrirangan, the principal author of National Education Policy 2020. For the benefit of the youngsters in particular, let me mention that Dr. Kasrirangan is not only a former president of Indian National Academy of Engineering, he was chairman ISRO, Secretary, Department of Space, Director of NIAS Bangalore, has been one of the most celebrated physicists working in the area of high energy astronomy. He is a fellow of all the national academies of the country. He is also a fellow of the Third World Academy of Sciences. He was the general president of Indian Science Congress Association. He received honorary fellow of the Cardiff University, UK, and academician of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, Vatican City. He received many, many awards. Obviously, we are not going to consume the entire time allotted to us in reading out his biodata. And he began as a young researcher with one of the most coveted awards of the country, Santi Sharu Bhatnagar Award. Dr. Kasrirangan is very passionate about education. Now, this particular initiative to develop national education policy took several years, actually. And INAE was fortunate to have made a little contribution towards it a couple of years back when this policy was in the formation. Today, we have a very eminent panel. So before I introduce them, let me take this opportunity to offer our appreciation, record our appreciation in a usual manner on behalf of the entire panel here, on behalf of the entire INAE and the audience today, in offering a bouquet of flowers to you, sir.
Thank you so much.
I should be failing in my duty if I don't mention one other very important aspect of Dr. Kasrirangan. He's a recipient of the topmost civilian awards of the country, Padma Shri, Padma Bhushan, Padma Vibhushan, and also was honored by the French government, the President of France, by Officer of the Legion d'Honneur. Let me now take the opportunity to introduce a very distinguished panel that we have with us today. We are privileged to have Dr. P.S. Goel, former president of INAE and chairperson of National Innovation Foundation of India. Welcome, sir. Mr. Senapati Krish Gopalakrishnan, co-founder Infosys and chairman of Acceler Ventures. Welcome, sir. We have Professor Anil D. Shastrabudhe, chairman, All India Council of Technical Education. We have Mr. M.V. Kotwal, formerly member of the L&T board and president, Heavy Engineering. We have Dr. Debashish Bhattacharjee, Vice President, Technology and New Materials Business, Tata Steel Limited, and a representative of the President of the CII, Mr. T.V. Narendran. We have Dr. Ananya Mukherjee, Vice Chancellor, Shivnadar University. We have Dr. K. Vaidya Subramaniam, Vice Chancellor, Shastra University, Tanjavur. We have Professor Punendu Ghosh, Vice President, INAE, and Executive Director, BISR Jaipur. Professor A.B. Pandit, Vice President, INAE, and Vice Chancellor of Institute of Chemical Technology. Professor Shivaji Chakravarti, Vice President, INAE, and Professor, Electrical Engineering, Jadavpur University. We'll shortly be joined by Professor M. Jagdish Kumar, Chairman, University Grants Commission. He's on the way, caught up in a traffic snarl somewhere. We'll also be joined by Professor Sandeep Verma, Secretary, Science and Engineering Research Board, Government of India. Now, let me take the privilege of introducing the genesis of this particular panel discussion. As I said, Indian National Academy of Engineering recognizes that engineering is the way and means to answer to the societal aspirations and the needs. So in order to pursue policies and initiatives in engineering, we believe that education lays the foundation and allows a pyramidal growth towards that professed goal. So national education policy has given an opportunity to the country to leapfrog into the 21st century and pursue the path charted out by none other than the Honorable Prime Minister of the country, self-reliance, Atmanirbharta. And in order to do that, we decided as Engineering Academy, we'll focus on engineering and technology. But national education policy, even only within the purview of engineering and technology, is not a very small domain. So in our Apex committee meeting, we decided that we are going to discuss very specific issues of national education policy related to engineering and technology. We identified 15 of very specific thematic points and distributed them into 5 different satellite events to precede this particular summit panel discussion. So accordingly, just for the convenience's sake, we named them as East, West, North, South, and Central, though they were the committees or the panels for these satellite events were not confined to the geographical boundary. So we have today with us all these 5 panel chairs. The first panel discussion was held by the Central Zone, and this was headed by Professor B.S. Murthy, Director, IIT Madras. So we are fortunate to have Professor B.S. Murthy with us today. And as you can see on the screen, that Professor Murthy had a very distinguished panel to help him in this particular discussion. Professor V. Kamakoti, Director, IIT Madras, Professor Q.M. Rao, Director, NIT Rourkela, Dr. KVM Mohan Reddy, former Founder Chairman, Salient Limited, Professor Rohini M. Godbole, Professor IISc Bangalore, and Professor G. Kanaveeran, Director, IIIT Sri City. Now, each of these panels, the way we formulated, we wanted to have one director or a former director of one of the topmost technological institutions in the country in these 5 different zones, one institutional leader from a non-government funded institution, one lady academician, and at least one industry leader. So with this kind of a constitution, we constituted 5 different committees, and each of them were tasked with 3 specific questions out of these grand list of 15. So we'll go one by one, and let me now have the privilege of inviting Professor B.S. Murthy to present before us the salient points that were discussed. And maybe, Professor Murthy, you may mention the 3 specific questions that you examined,
Sure.
and then tell us about the specific recommendations coming from the committee. And sir, Dr. Kasturirangan, sir, all these recommendations are being presented before you and the panel, so that after the first 50 minutes, we'll take up discussions on any of these major recommendations that come out and how to take them forward. Over to you, Professor Murthy.
Thank you very much, Professor Manna. And first of all, thank you for the Apex Committee for giving us this opportunity to discuss about NEP, which is wonderful way forward for any educational institutions. And as you can see on the screen, we have 3 topics that have been given to our satellite panel. And the first one is about the need for competent teaching faculty and the infrastructure for offering truly multidisciplinary subjects, courses, and degree programs, and also a time frame to enhance budget outlay in education to 6% GDP. Most of the panel members felt that the second part of it is a little beyond the scope of discussion. But the first part, most of the panelists have spent a lot of time to discuss. So salient recommendations that came out is what I am presenting here in front of you. First and foremost, as you all know, quality teaching is a must in any at any level, whether it is school level or at the higher education level. We are talking about higher education, particularly engineering education. But what is important is generally it is seen, for example, all IITs, when somebody is recruited as a faculty member, we ask them to give a presentation on the research that they do. And we try to assume that if somebody is a good researcher, he is also a good teacher. But many a times it doesn't happen that way. So there is a need to look at teaching abilities of faculty in a closely. And this is one of the recommendations. Many of the IITs have now started doing it. I can say for at least IIT Hyderabad, we ask every newly prospective faculty to give a 30-minute talk on a blackboard, which is at the second year BTech level, choosing a topic of his own choice. So that is something which can give some idea of what the capabilities of a teacher. And the panel was also discussing about to see how to incentivize teaching. Many a times when you go for promotions and things like that, teaching takes a back seat. Anyway, you are supposed to teach. Okay, what else you have done? Is the kind of question that people generally ask. So that is something which has been discussed in the panel in a big way. And then also more importantly, to see how to nurture the teaching abilities of faculty. Many IITs, particularly IITs and NITs also possibly, do a lot of faculty development programs for outsiders. But for insiders, there are very rarely any faculty development programs. We have started it at the last 2 years at IIT Hyderabad, just as an example. So that is something which is very essential. And also, I mean, particularly one of the panelists was particular to say that we should have a periodical certification programs for the teachers in education institutions, which is, if there is a possibility of doing that. And there should be a kind of a research cell, education research cell at every institution, which looks at what are all the developments that are happening in pedagogy and how to bring that into the teaching. And multidisciplinarity is the key for growth, and most of the institutions, NEP talks a lot about it, and somehow most of the education in India has been straitjacketed. We have mechanical engineering, chemical engineering, and so on and so forth, and how to bring them together, particularly at the master's level. A number of multidisciplinary programs are coming up. Most of the IITs are doing it. At IIT Hyderabad, in the last 2 years, we have brought out almost 8 such programs. We have an MTech in energy, we have an MTech in sensors, we have an MTech in e-waste management, we have even an MTech in medical device innovations and things like that. We have even started a BTech in computational engineering, where chemical engineers, civil engineers, mechanical engineers, all of them come together and give a very solid mathematics footing and then teach them solid mechanics and fluid mechanics. Such a BTech program did not exist so far. So whereas computer science talks something different typically. So things like this are going to be the order of the day as we go along, and that is something people have to emphasize. And coming to the second aspect, how to make India Atmanirbhar. Okay. Though there are a few other points that are there, I don't want to read everything, and this document will be there with you for you to read later. So this is something which is essential, and we have been celebrating this particular year about the Atmanirbhar, and one of the pet slogans of our Honorable Prime Minister. And we strongly believe that it is possible only when academic institutions work very closely with industry, and there has to be a lot of efforts from both sides to ensure such collaborations exist. And also try to bring in entrepreneurial outlook among the students. For example, now Startup India is something which is an important slogan that again our Honorable Prime Minister brought out, and so much of efforts are going on. At IIT Hyderabad, for example, we have a department of entrepreneurship, a school of innovation and entrepreneurship is just being started. So there is a lot of emphasis that is needed in this particular aspect, and ensuring that students spend a lot of time in industry, and also faculty spending time in the industry. INAE, for example, has a scheme of faculty spending time in industry. And that is something which is essential, and when you have that happening, and also you have professors of practice coming from industry spending time in academia, and that is something which will help. Many a times our internship programs are summer internships. At IIT Hyderabad, for example, we have made a semester-long internship where students can spend almost 7 months in the industry, and that is something which we strongly believe will take a long way for the people to come together, and that is something which will definitely make Atmanirbhar a reality very soon for all of us. And the last but not the least topic, which is the most important topic, ethics, integrity, and gender sensitivity, particularly what is called inclusiveness. Okay, there have been efforts. For example, now JEE says 20% of the seats should be reserved for women. So that is one type of inclusiveness based on the women aspects, that is just looking at the gender equality, but there is a lot that need to be done. So this is particularly Professor Rohini spoke a lot. She is outspoken, you all know about her, and she has a lot to say about it, that particularly if we look at this whole audience, we have only one lady sitting there. So that's something that I think there is a need to ensure that we have more and more at the higher position, particularly decision making and leadership positions. We need to have women occupying space and ensuring that there is a lot of inclusiveness. STEM in the various fields of STEM, we need to bring that in, and STIP also, the innovation policy also talks a lot about bringing the equality and then inclusiveness in a big way, and I think we need to implement this. So today's panel is all about implementation. So the thoughts are there, but implementation is somewhere I think we need to do more on that. Okay, so that is something that the whole committee felt that we need to bring in policies which can ensure that there is more and more of presence of various sections of people, not just women, in the education, particularly at the decision making level, to ensure that we have a country which grows in an inclusive way. Okay, I think these are the three topics that we have covered. If there are any questions, I am willing to take. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Murthy. This is a very succinct summary, and we certainly will have time to discuss the recommendations when it comes to that stage. So without wasting time, let me invite Professor P.P. Chakravarti, former director, IIT Kharagpur, and a very celebrated professor in computer science and engineering area. So Professor Chakravarti's team, he represented East Zone, but he had experts from all over the country, including a student member. So the three questions he was tasked with, his committee was tasked with, covered emphasis on research in teaching and degree courses, policy implementation with flexible credit point systems, credit bank, and credit transfer. And the third thing was the utilization of physical and conventional mode alongside digital mode of education. So over to you, Professor Chakravarti.
Thank you, Professor Manna, Professor Kasturi Rangan, Dr. Kasturi Rangan, and all the distinguished members of the panel today. We had a session on 13th of April, and if you can show the slides, I will be. So our topic was on academic aspects, and the first thing we realized was that effective NEP implementation is an engineering exercise. It's no longer a philosophical exercise. It's no longer an exercise of discussing where to go, how to go. It's basically an engineering exercise. And next slide, please. Next slide. So we had a session on 13th of April from 5 p.m. We had main topic was what are the issues to be addressed for successful implementation, as my friend Murthy just mentioned, and how can INAE become a catalyst. Three topics were given to us: emphasis of research in teaching of degree courses, policy on implementation of credit point systems and credit bank, an optimal blend of education through physical and conventional and digital mode. We had 9 people. They are listed here. We started at 5 p.m. Professor Shobik Bhattacharya sent his comments by email because he could not be physically present. I had invited the INAE leadership of Professor Manna and Professor Shivaji Chakravarti in the hope that some engineering trick will be done to offer us some tea, coffee online. But since that did not happen, we completed by 7:30 from 5 o'clock. And as usual with all the people on board, we not only covered these 3 topics, we went across and tried to cover everybody else's topic. So we came to our recommendations. Next slide, please. So the summary of our recommendation is something like this, that NEP cannot be implemented by the talent and people of only academic institutions. NEP has to be implemented by the talent and people of the country. And therefore, we have to integrate people beyond academic institutions with the complementary skills, experience to bring NEP successful. Otherwise, only academic institutions with 1:40 teacher-student ratio is not going to successfully implement NEP. So how to do that? Second question is, the first pushback you find in all these things was, you talk about NEP, they will tell you IIT Delhi mein ye hota hai. This happens in ISC Bangalore. That happens in Jadavpur University. So you will get a pushback saying everything is there. But when you try to calculate numbers, you will find that is only scaling to 1% of the country. So the engineering challenge is to first put the best practices from that 1% to 30%. If you cannot do that, then it's trouble. The happy part is that both Professor Jagdish Kumar, Professor Anil Sahasrabuddhe are there, and the ministry is there, and we have Sandeep Verma here, who have tried to initiate certain seed policies which are capable of doing that. But still, it needs to scale. If it needs to go down to the districts of India, then the challenge is completely different. And that ball game has to be understood to implement NEP. Otherwise, we sitting in this room will come to the conclusion that everything is there, all policies are there, everything is there. But NEP will not be implemented that way. All of us know that. So, the second thing is infrastructure. There isn't enough laboratories in the rural and the less endowed institutions. There are enough laboratories in the dustbins of top institutions, all rejected. You go to central store of any of the 5 top IITs, you will find there are enough for 10 laboratories in 10 institutions. So what do we do? It's an engineering challenge. Secondly is that, as I said, best practices are there. The challenge is to scale up. And if we are not able to scale up and ensure diversity, we will have difficulty. It is possible. There are enough minds, policies, and goodwill of the people to do it. The third is, in order to scale, we checked up with the National Digital Library. If we have to make one library, if we make 20 libraries a day, we will not make enough libraries in the whole country physically. But if we go digital, then there is a chance that we will reach 50% of the people in 5 years. So use digital to the extent of using digital. Pushback, engineering cannot be taught digitally. That is the challenge. The challenge is to figure out how engineering can be taught digitally. If we take this pushback, we will never produce Elon Musk. Everybody told him only what he cannot do. And he has done everything what he was told he cannot do. So that is our challenge. How much of digital can we use to reach the nooks and corners of this country? Professor Murthy B.S. Murthy's team has identified that our core is to develop the next generation faculty. We analyzed and found that all that the faculty teaches in less endowed institutions, don't talk about IITs, IISc, top grade institutions, Shastra University. Most of the teachers teach in their class what they learned during their undergraduate days. So, upgradation of faculty and a national initiative for that is necessary. Then, everybody talks about bank of credit, students, their pathways. So, what we are missing, and which I had stated earlier also, is a national academic information system. Unless we have a national academic information system which will have everything, we will neither have credit bank, nor we will know pathway of a student, nor we will be able to monitor NEP. Next is CSR. CSR is the biggest strength for this country to implement NEP. and everybody wants to support education. You will see people have given their pension money for education, college, school, etc. So please let us try to evolve a policy, that was the committee's recommendation, that will make it smooth. One click of a button, you will be able to ensure that you give money to a required institution and get the benefit of CSR, whatever it is required. And finally, INAE, Indian National Academy of Science, all of this, if we hold meetings, have dinner and go away, then that will be our contribution to NEP. So if we decide we want to do something, let us be with NEP for its success for the next 5 years and not hold only meetings once in a while. Next slide, please. Sorry, but I thought that this is important for us to know.
Please go ahead.
So the first detailed recommendation is democratize access to resources and practices. A larger talent pool, get access to people beyond the institution, alumni, industry, retired people, people who are grassroots innovators. Why don't we have a national faculty directory of what they can do, how they can contribute? Nobody will ask for money. Very few people will ask for money. All they will ask is a certificate from Dr. Kasturi Rangan. I can assure you that will be enough. E-certificate, sir. Secondly is incentivize every organization. Dr. Bhattacharya is here. Tata Steel will be happy to tell people you do extra 10% of your time, we will give you recognition. Nobody gives money. But they will recognize them for giving 10% of their extra time to some academic institution to take classes. The organization will just give a recognition. There is no money involved. It's a question of goodwill. Then peer-assisted learning. Throughout we have realized that the best people, and our students told us, the best people who teach the current students is the freshly graduated student or the senior students. There has been ideas of peer-assisted learning in pockets, and it has been very successful in institutions. You go to any IIT in the evening, senior students hold programming classes, senior students hold solutions to classes. They will have classes which will show them what this teacher will ask in the exam tomorrow, which questions will come, and how to answer those questions. They are the best. Institutionalize it. Make a platform for it. Scale it up. Second is access to physical laboratories. There is an iSTEM program in this country. This iSTEM program has mapped all, Professor Verma will know, it has mapped all the government funded infrastructure. How much of it is used? When is it free? If we go on mapping this to a much larger scale, we will have so much of capacity. It will be the equivalent of the OYO rooms. The OYO rooms are giving everybody's house as rooms. You will be able to get equivalent of OYO rooms in terms of infrastructure and facilities. Then incentivized shared remote laboratory development in less organizations. Give it name, PP Chakravarti laboratory for in some gaon, but give it. Please make it easy for them to do it. Then we know we run so many things. We don't have a national cloud. We don't have a national compute. Everybody buys computers. In IIT Kharagpur, there must be 20,000 PCs. And sir will know what is the use. If we have a national cloud, if we have national compute, the whole concept of education of this country, implementation of NEP will get transformed. And enable organizations, ISRO, DRDO, all of them, give them some, if they run a credit course in the summer, in 1 week, 2 weeks, laboratories of certain instruments, if they are allowed to do that and give credits for that, let it go into the academic credit bank. Then on the right side, NEP says many things and there are a lot of good practices. All we need to do is document them, streamline them, and make it possible. Already, Professor Jagdish Kumar has made a wonderful announcement of multi-degrees. See, these are coming as policies. Let us accelerate them. Let us accelerate these into policies. And it is not just acceleration, it is also a streamlined implementation. Implementation is at the heart, execution is at the heart of this. So I think that is very important. Immersion, everybody talked about immersion. Next generation education, people told us in that committee that next generation education is not about learning mechanical engineering and drives and all that. 50% is that, the rest of it is learning how to learn new things. They will live for 80 years of their life. They are not going to complete their learning in 5 years. People are going to live for 80 years. If we don't teach them how to learn new things, and how should that be incorporated in the curriculum? That is not something people have talked about. And I think the best minds should get into that mode of immersion learning of new things. There are best practices. We have listed out a few best practices. I don't want to go into details. Multi-year projects. There is a work integrated learning program. People while working are learning. So how do we put that? NEP will not be successful if working people cannot learn in future. If NEP does not end with just university education. NEP is not about it. And finally, we have got wonderful experiences like Gyan, Spark, where people from abroad come and teach. I know AICT has initiated a scheme by which good institutions of the country, teachers can teach the other institutions. Professor Sahasrabudhe already conceptualized it. We need to scale up. We need to have platforms by which people can communicate. We need to really get there into action. Next slide, please. And digital. If India wants to proceed, then India must massively scale up digital. NDR, which is the National Digital Education Architecture, it is going through discussion. It must be rolled out in phases. If we want to make a perfect NDR at the end, it will never be made. Then NNB ICT scheme, virtual labs, people said, virtual labs and making it immersive with all the AR, VR is an absolute necessity for democratizing laboratories. Today we have the technology, Murthy himself knows that he has a facility where many institutions paid for. You can run your experiment on that physical facility from here. The robotic arm will run that experiment, right? So there is mechanism, and these mechanisms should be adopted and scaled. And I said national compute and cloud infrastructure beyond supercomputing mission. We need to build Indian virtual learning ecosystems at various levels of granularity. Google, Zoom, cloud. We have to make our own one. Otherwise, we won't have the data, we won't have the analytics, we won't have the know-how to do all that. And MOOCs, this massive online has gone. Now people are making online micro classrooms. The technology is completely transformed. So we need to have a mission for that if we want to scale up NEP. Then the National Education Information System. One recommendation of our committee is have this. Let there be an integrated information portal. For everybody to know where are the teachers, who are the expertise, where have the students gone, what is available, everything. Initiate a national R&D program on AI/ML driven digital education technology. If we don't do that, we were talking about translation. translation is not going to happen by translators. It must become machine assisted. And EdTech entrepreneurs are all over the country. And AICT has started a mechanism of integrating them. They must be integrated into the system, but with all the safeguards and everything that we want to bring in. But we must bring education technology entrepreneurs. Academicians will not be entrepreneurs of education technology. They may be researchers, but they will not implement it on the ground. Next slide, please. Thank you, sir.
Let me have the privilege of now inviting recommendations coming from the Western Zone. This was led by Professor Subhash Chaudhary, Director, IIT Bombay. And Professor Chaudhary's panel, as you can see on the screen, was again a very distinguished one. Professor Ks Dasgupta, Director, DAIICT Gandhinagar, Dr. Harik Veen from TCS, Dr. G. Aguila, Director, NIT Trichy, Professor K. N. Satyanarayana, Director, IIT Tirupati, and Professor Preeta Pant from IIT Bombay. And they were tasked with questions related to multiple entry and exit, admissions policy, and removal or modification of age-related restrictions in admission and completion. So Professor Professor Chaudhary is tied up in a very important meeting, so he's unable to join us physically or even through video. So he has sent his recommendations through a video recording. This is what we are going to play now.
Okay. Dr. Kasturi Rangan and other members. This is Subhashish Chaudhary. I am connecting from IIT Bombay, and on behalf of INAE, I moderated one of the 5 panels which was to be held for the western part of India, and we were delighted to have 5 very, very distinguished group of panelists, starting with Dr. Ks Dasgupta, who was earlier working as one of the scientists in SAC ISRO, and currently who is the director of DAICT in Gandhinagar. We had Dr. Harik Veen, who is one of the top technology officer of TCS in Pune. We also had Professor G. Akhila, who is the director of NIT Tiruchirappalli. Then we had Professor K. N. Satyanarayana, director of IIT Tirupati. And finally, we had one of the subject expert in terms of NEP, which is Professor Preeta Pant, who served as an Associate Dean Academic Program at IIT Bombay. We were actually asked to discuss on 3 different topics, okay, very specifically, which is more on the administrative aspect. There are multiple entry and exit, and then what are the corresponding dual degree provisions, or what are the lateral entry and exit provisions, what are the difficulties, what would be the admission policy based on the lower to higher ranking institutions, and thirdly, what would happen if we have the removal or modification of age-related restrictions in admission and completion. So we had a very, very engrossing discussion, and what I do right now is summarize the overall contributions without mentioning who said what. But at the beginning, I think we realized, all the panelists, that there are certain things to be taken into account when you look for the ease of implementation of NEP, particularly the engineering curriculum. And that is the resource availability in India. Sometimes we try to compare what are the opportunities in education that we have in Western Europe or in USA or Canada. But in India, we do not have the same set of resources. there are resource constraints. And to give an example, it's very common in Europe and other places, particularly I was told that in Norway, when somebody goes into the, let's say, the engineering school at the first year undergraduate, in the second year onwards, roughly 70% of the people do not actually get out of the engineering school because they drop out. So only 30% people in the pipeline actually make it. On the other hand, if you look at most of the IITs, NITs, and several other CFTIs, our pipeline is 100% efficient. So that means whoever comes in, more or less, they go out. We call it a very efficient system, and this is an efficient utilization of the resources that we have in India for a large country like ours. On the other hand, this is a direct challenge when you go for this multiple entry and multiple exit, because we really have to understand that when you actually somebody exits midway or tries to enter somewhere in the midway, then what happens to the resource? Institutions are committed to the resource, and if we have to leave it open, then there is an issue of the suboptimal usage of resource. Of course, this is completely opposite to the corresponding NEP demand that our students should have the freedom to move freely from area to another area, or from one institute to the other institute. So this was very definitely one of the issues. The second issue is the challenge of the cost. Okay, sometimes, particularly in the higher education, in engineering, certain areas are quite expensive in terms of if you have to pay for the students, in terms of their stipend, the kind of laboratory equipments and others. So given this kind of constraint, and when we look at the three subject matters that were given to us, okay, it was felt that certain things are possibly doable and without too much affecting the overall the scenario in terms of the the resource crunch or the the too much of modifications, which are some of them are already existing in many of the IITs and NITs. And for example, one would say that if you want to have multidisciplinary and if you want to have the different way of earning other kind of knowledge than what you have joined for, then you can actually use minors in a different department, which doesn't add too much of requirement in terms of the resources. And another possible thing is that something like in IIT Bombay we have, which is called the interdepartmental dual degree program, where a student, when he joins in a department X, can actually do the master's, and the BTech could be in different department X, and there could be a minor in another specialization, could be in Y, whereas the master's degree could be in a third department, which could be Z. So this is complete flexibility as regards the the what kind of subject area and the disciplinarity that they want. Okay, and this is easier to do. But on the other hand, if you look at the area that if somebody wants to leave midway from one institution and takes the credit through the academic bank of the credit bank and goes to another institution, then what happens is that it is a good thing and it is doable only when all these the credit lending the institutions from where the students earn the credit, they are of similar value in perception. This has been raised that if you look at somebody, let's say, have a particular set of courses for which he got the credit from IIT Bombay, and then if you go to another, let's say, the lower rung institution, then what is the perception in the mind of the people who would be rather than joining them or rather taking them for their employment, is that the perception of which particular credit comes from which particular the institution. So perception is very important, and I don't think right now we have a solution. This is something that we need to think. And the other aspect that it was talked about is that when you look at somebody doing this credit from different ones, the university finally, which gives the degree, now there may be a mixed match of various certain kind of areas, and we know that various government and other organizations, when they are actually giving a job, let's say particularly they are asking for a job, they demand the student to have graduated in a particular specific department. For example, it is electrical or mechanical or something like computer science. So what happens if a student earns a degree which is some combination of mechanical and computer science? Then this is not very clear. So what it requires a change management on the point of view of all these employers. Although it's not specifically a problem for private agencies, because they really do not worry too much of where the degree comes from or what is the basic degree, as long as they do well in their performance and at the time of their interviews. The other aspect is that when you actually go through the different the admission cycle, this is another thing that we talk, is that most of the time the top of the pyramid decides the academic calendar. Like for example, since the JEE Advance is very badly delayed for the last couple of years, including this year, what happens is the rest of the calendar, the academic calendar for all other colleges get also affected. Now this is something that we need to see, is that can you decouple, because there is one exam which is very, very taxing for others. But the fact is that earlier there were proposals that can you take, let's say, 10% of the students from different board, they are the toppers, you can take them in the first year, and then you run your test for analytical or abilities and others, and if they do well, they can continue. So which is a good suggestion, but the problem there is that are we deferring the agony to the next year? Okay. In this case, what would happen, the particular set of student, now they actually after joining for 1 year, since it is the actual decision comes after 1 year, then it's a lot of difficulty for them, because they have to go through the same kind of the training or coaching that goes on. And what happens if they don't make it to one of the best places? So that's a problem that we are looking at, to what would be the current set of solutions. But few things also is realized that certain things can be done. For example, semester exchange of students from various universities of similar kind of perception to the common people. That is definitely one possibility that we can think of. And we can also say that, the last aspect is the age. So normally, we say that most of the exams do not really have too much of a constraint on what is the age, how many times if you want to give the exam. But the problem is that because these are highly demanded courses, particularly in the professional areas, sometimes a student at a young age ends up spending a tremendously long time in their life, sometimes 5, 6, 7 years preparing, and finally not making it. So what happens for a nation? It's a big loss, because you have lost the manpower for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. So is that the right thing? So what the panel thought would be that it is good to have some restriction when you are going for undergraduate degree. But when you go for master's and PhD, then ideally this is not a compulsion. This is somebody's because of the love for the topic or for career upgradation. Then we need not have any kind of age restrictions, which is typically true in most of the universities. So that particular characteristic, I think, should be retained. And I think with that, I think I've explained in detail. So thank you so much. I'm sorry I'm not able to come to there physically, but I hope it serves the purpose. Bye.
Set of excellent recommendations. Let me have the privilege of now inviting Professor Anurag Kumar, former director of ISC Bangalore and a very celebrated researcher and teacher in electronics and communications area. So Professor Anurag Kumar represented the southern zone and was tasked with 3 specific topics related to the concept of National Research Foundation, industry participation in teaching and research in academic institutions, and the third one was about skilling, employability, deployability, entrepreneurship in engineering education. Over to you, Professor Kumar, and welcome to this panel, remotely though.
Thank you very much. Our slide visible?
Yeah. You may like to go full screen?
Yes, I'll do that.
Yeah.
So, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this. Good evening, of NSF model have to be understood, and this can help in the formation of India's NRF. One of the main focuses of NRF should be to spread the culture of research to even the state universities and the colleges across India. We need to eliminate dichotomy of teaching and research and the rigid disciplinarity which many of the panelists have already mentioned. We need to encourage good researchers to join as faculty members and perhaps by offering them good startup grants and attractive employment conditions. We need to seek the help of academies. Again, somebody mentioned that already, in finding research mentors for these institutions and address the problem of getting good proposals from these institutions. The experience here until now has been quite not so good. To lay out the best practices for cultivation of research careers of bright researchers in universities, what we often find is that the university teachers are not given the right kind of incentives and motivation, and there is no culture of research. And we need to work out best practices for encouraging research careers among these faculty. We need to vigorously promote research in social sciences, arts, and humanities. This has already been mentioned in the NEP, but it needs to be a very important part of the discussion going forward rather than just SNT. NRF will need to enhance the current research funding ecosystem. We need to coordinate the existing funding agencies to overall uplift research quality and quantity. We need to bring in a competitive proposal peer review system, keeping in mind the best practices the world over. We need to study the best practices the world over, how proposals are sought and reviewed, granted and then reviewed, and recognize that it's important to cultivate strengths in research in universities and institutions while building a wide research base. So those institutions which are already strong in research, cultivate their strengths further while building a wide research base in other universities, which are teaching universities right now. Bring in a broader base, a broader view of research impact, not publication and various counts alone, which will encourage people to take more risks and go beyond what they've already been doing for a long time. And fund a range of proposals from the most foundational to development missions, and all projects should be that are funded must be monitored very closely. Other issues that are related to what I've written above is to make research careers in academia an attractive proposition in India, find ways for doing that. We attract the best minds to India and to do research in our universities. And this has also been mentioned in the NEP, but I'm emphasizing it here. Can the science and engineering research academies provide high quality SNT policy inputs to the government, which hasn't really been happening in big measure until now. The other topic we were given is industry participation. What does the NEP say? Well, first of all, the NEP recognizes that, first of all, the NEP does not have a particular section on industry research, but what NEP does recognize is that we need to have strong linkages between the government, universities, and the industry. We need to have relevant, socially useful research that reaches society and the industry. I think many of these things are pretty obvious. I will not spend too much time on them. Industry has to play a role in higher education through internships, sources of expertise for teaching in universities, recruitment of university faculty with industry experience, industry experts on advisory and governing boards of universities. And in a similar way, universities should play a role in the industry by training the industry in the continuing education programs. So that's what the NEP says. What does our panel say? Our panel recognizes the fact that in India, the government, academia, industry research triangle is known to be weak. India could at present be in the stage of absorbing ideas and techniques from other nations. But we do notice that there are strong implementation and manufacturing bases already emerging in India, for example, in information technology and pharma and now even in the telecom sector. So India has begun to compete with the best in many sectors. What we need to recognize is the strong linkage of discovery research and need-driven invention, which is often not recognized in universities, even the top universities. The linkages and the dynamism between them has to be recognized. We recall Bell Labs, where Nobel Prizes were being won hand in hand with cutting-edge products. We can get many realistic research questions from the industry, provided that the industry is at the right stage of system development. It will require a change of mindset of what is expected from a faculty member, not just publication counts, but also impact to our economy. There's, of course, a matter of time scale of getting results, which industry and the academia have to agree on. And that is the issue of IP sharing between the industry and the academia. It is not very common in India for university professors to spend a summer in a local company, very common in other countries. This helps in exposure to real research questions and can help enhance one's pay package. Student internships are often frowned upon by faculty as they are viewed as cheap labor for the industry. On the other hand, it helps the student's growth, and it's a chance for the student to bring back some interesting ideas to our research. Professors of practice, adjunct faculty members are systems that should be leveraged significantly in our ecosystem. Finally, we were asked to look at skilling and vocational education. The NEP has a lot to say about this. Essentially, vocational education is about acquiring a defined set of practical competencies, a specific area of work in the economy, acquiring the knowledge, skills, and attitudes, also the communication skills, the soft skills, computer literacy, and so on and so forth. It is estimated that less than 5% of the 19 to 24 age group individuals have had formal vocational education. The NEP identifies several reasons for this. Vocational education is viewed as a dead end for those choosing that route in the post-school years. Often people are viewed as dropouts if they take on vocational education, viewed as inferior to mainstream education. The NEP, on the other hand, to fix this problem, aims to integrate vocational training programs into mainstream education. Children in school will be exposed to vocational education at an early stage so that they can choose different career paths. The focus of vocational education will be based on skill gap analysis, mapping of local opportunities, and the MOE will set up a national committee for integration of vocational education and CIDE. I understand the chairman is also involved in this activity. The National Skill Qualification Framework, defined about 10 years back, apparently lacks, and the NEP envisages improving this framework, and I'll talk more about that in my last slide. So, our panel's comments and suggestions were as follows. It's important to encourage students to seek vocational education rather than only formal degrees. Bring back experiential learning at a very early stage. Apparently, Maharashtra has already been doing this quite successfully. They have this introduction to basic technology very early in the school program. We need extensive availability of computer labs. Programming, hardware, and networking has to be introduced at an early stage. The bottlenecks we expect in trying to do this would be a shortage of teachers, and this is where universities and research institutions and IITs and NITs and all can help in training technical teachers and staff. The cost of VE is going to be high, so can the ITIs and the Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Kendras, universities and industry help in providing the infrastructure required for vocational education equipment? The skills qualification framework is lacking. It essentially only counts the number of years of school and college beyond some grade. There's no credit framework which could permit a VE student to move over to HE. And the mapping of NSQF to national occupation standard needs to be aligned. International standards, the young people who want to migrate can do so easily. So there is this important need for alignment of the national skill qualification framework and the international frameworks. This is also there's a lot of scope for research needed in this space, skills mapping, curricula mapping, identification of futuristic skills, etc. So thank you all very much for listening to me. I'm done.
Thank you very much, Professor Kumar, for very thoughtful and well-composed recommendations. We'll take them forward. Also, thanks to your panel. Please stay with us, Professor Kumar, if you could. So let me now move to the recommendation from the fifth panel, which is from the North Zone. Unfortunately, Professor Ramgopal Rao is held up in a UPSC meeting today and is unable to join. So he has sent the recommendations of his committee. Let me just share with you that the panel consisted of Professor V. Ramgopal Rao, former director IIT Delhi, as the convener, Mr. Sumant Sinha, founder and MD Renew Power, Professor Niharika Vora, Vice Chancellor, Delhi Skill and Entrepreneurship University, Professor Ranjan Bose, Director IIIT Delhi, Professor Ajit K. Chaturvedi, Director IIT Roorkee, and unfortunately, Professor Shantishree D. Pandit, Vice Chancellor of JNU, couldn't join at the last moment. So they were tasked with 3 specific points related to how to ensure academic autonomy for the higher education institutions in India. Number 2, international component, how to promote that in tertiary level of education in India. And the third thing was the concept of Higher Education Council of India. Which way should it be designed? NEP does talk about all these aspects. So this particular panel of Professor Ramgopal Rao says that Higher Education Council of India should not be treated as a government department. So what they mean is that it should have its own autonomy, and I think that is already spoken about in NEP recommendations. Granting academic, administrative, and financial autonomy to all the higher education institutions in a time-bound manner is absolutely essential for utilizing the intellectual capital that exists in these institutions. The committee says autonomy must go hand in hand with accountability. Autonomy needs to be coupled with a proper financial model for the institutions by taking into account multiple institutional growth parameters, performance, and aspirations. The committee says one needs to develop mechanisms for granting graded autonomy to institutions based on their performance. So coupled with accountability, performance also should be a parameter. Autonomy must empower the boards to take decisions concerning the institution. There is a need to streamline faculty recruitment and assessment processes in higher education institutions. Proper incentive mechanisms need to be worked out for well-performing faculty and staff. Then the committee says institutions need to exhibit a much higher level of openness and enthusiasm to attract industry interactions. The second, or rather the third, actually this concerns both 2 aspects, institutional autonomy and Higher Education Council of India. On the third aspect was internationalization. This is a very important component because all of us are aware that many of the top Indian institutions lose out in international ranking because of this one single component. So this particular panel proposes that internationalization is absolutely essential from the point of building cultural diversity on our campuses. It can transform the institutional culture, also required from international ranking point of view. The committee says international students at the master's and PhD level must be welcome in our institutions. At the UG level, the committee feels that the process of admission is too restrictive. On the other hand, we may encourage more of exchange programs at the UG level. The committee says proper marketing of India's higher education sector in countries abroad is absolutely essential. Individual institutions do not have enough resources to do that, but at the government level, particularly through campaigns like Incredible India, such exercises can be taken up. The committee says we need to identify target countries for such exercise, and it says that it actually is a challenge for government institutions to open campuses abroad, obviously because of financial reasons. So a financing scheme is required to enable internationalization of our top institutions. So these are the major recommendations coming from the panel headed by Professor Ram Gopal Rao. So with this, we come to the end of the round of recommendations coming from these 5 satellite events, or the 5 specific panels tasked with 3 into 5, 15 specific questions. So now we come to the main objective of this panel discussion. So at the very beginning, I think it is time that we should first hear Dr. K. Kasturirangan. I think suffice to say that he is the principal architect of NEP 2020, and it is only seen to be believed that the amount of enthusiasm and devotion he carries for this very passion called national education policy. He showed me stacks of papers and notings that he's carrying and he actually wants to pursue. Let me also, sir, for your satisfaction, let me add that generally this is the delight of any professor to see all students present in the class. And today is one such very rare occasion when everybody listed in the panel are present except the Secretary Higher Education. For obvious reasons, he's tied up and he did send us the intimation. But I'm told now we have Dr. D.K. Sharma, Director from Ministry of Education, present online. Dr. Sharma, are you present? He must be connected somehow. Otherwise, he is connected, right? Okay. So we'll have an opportunity to hear from him. Sir, what we now wish to do, that first we would like to hear from you as to what is your impression about these set of recommendations coming from 5 satellite events. And then we have a very distinguished panel here. In fact, one may easily say that this is probably the most power-packed panel one could ever think of for discussing implementation of national education policy. In this room, I think one couldn't have asked for anything better. So, sir, over to you now. We are all ears to listen to you and your advices.
Thank you, Professor Manna. I would like to first thank the INAE as well as Professor Manna in particular for inviting me to this very interesting session on the eve of the foundation day of the INAE. When you really, every year you conduct some very distinguished lectures and discussions to mark this important day, and I'm extremely happy that you chose the INAE, the discussion on how to take the NAP forward in this year's program. So I'd like to thank you, compliment you, and also congratulate you for many things that you have done since you took over as the President of the Indian National Academy of Engineering. I do know that you have been very much keen on the educational component of it. I would particularly like to emphasize this. And I should also like to emphasize that the education as an area in the INAE has not been as strong as it has been in the other areas of INAE. So I think probably both the NEP and your presence as the President together could provide a new impetus to this area of education. And since NEP is here to stay, and it's in the first 10 years, we are going to really evaluate how the NEP is going to work. And the next 10 years is what you call as an operational phase. And I've been also told that the third decade should mark the final fine-tuning, whatever had to be done to take it forward further. So it's a very long-drawn effort that the country has undertaken. 30 years ultimately is equivalent to what the 30 years have elapsed before after the past policy was enunciated. So it's quite obvious that this 30 years means there may be a lot of discussions, a lot of reviews, a lot of evaluations, a lot of assessments, and a lot of probably fine-tuning and changes that will happen. So it is again this backdrop that we met here. You said it rightly that INAE is probably the first academy in the country among the 4 leading academies to have come out with this kind of a discussion session. Even though it is in the engineering, a lot of things will happen in the discussions, if not now, later, on things beyond this thing, because by restricting ourselves to the educational, the engineering component of it, in some way, weakly, I will be violating the very spirit of NEP, because we are there talking of an integrated, holistic concept, and we have the very first meeting, we have started discussing only the engineering part of it. So I hope many of the members here will also bring in this concept of the holisticity and the integrated concept of the policy in their comments as we try to take the discussions forward. The other part of it is with respect to the overall policy. I want to say that the policy of 15 years of school education and the subsequent education at the higher level, in some sense, we had to look at it in an integrated knowledge package, and then look at the 15 years of schooling as a very specialized package and see its connectivity to the higher education and also for vocationalization, and finally also for job opportunities at the exit of the secondary education. This is a very significant change from the previous approaches to the school education, which has its impact on the higher education too. That's why I'm telling. A 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4 formula for the school education has been done, primarily keeping in mind the developmental trajectory for a child, its cognitive capabilities, neuroscience related inputs, and we had to consult quite a number of experts in this area to make sure that we are giving the right input at the right age for the child so that it is able to grasp and take it. And also one should be recognized that the first 5 years to first 8 years, we have a serious problem of dealing with brain development. It is not uniform. So you need to have to attend individual youngsters in that period, and which essentially means the first 5 years cannot be a structured education. So we had to go for conceptual and perceptual kind of a thing, with moving towards abstract ideas. So that was the first 5 years. And then there was the preparation for more structured thinking. And finally, the last 5 years where we try to bring in curriculum and things of that kind in a structured manner and giving enough amount of flexibility for the youngster to make choices. So this is the 15-year scenario. And then that choices are two important components. One, to take you through a job and also the questions of vocational education. And the other one is to move towards the higher education. And there are 4 or 5 important points I would like to say with regard to the higher education. First, of course, is, as I said, we had to bring in the concept of multidisciplinarity. And this multidisciplinarity certainly brings in the type of knowledge base that you need to have in the modern context, a 21st century requirement in terms of job and other kinds of endeavors. And therefore, we have promoted that aspect of it. In this undergraduate education, particularly, we have tried to bring in the question of a liberal education. The liberal education is something that has been tested out in many institutions, or in many places, and we cannot lag behind this in the context of the education. The silos in which the present education has gone through, we obviously have to review that with respect to the efficacy, and we came to the point that we need to look at it again, the 4-year undergraduate program and also a 3-year program which we kept from the previous one, how they have to be structured with regard to a liberal education. We have enunciated the principles behind it. I am sure that many of the members here in the higher education will comment on that aspect of it in the context of an engineering education. But when I talk of a holistic education, it does mean that ultimately all the education will move toward a holisticity, where the general mainstream education, the professional education and the vocational education will merge in institutions. And for doing this, we have also defined the structuring of the institutions too. And so we have 3 levels of structuring of the institutions. The first, of course, is the what you call it, in US, you call it research universities. Second is the teaching university. Research university has both teaching and research to equal significance. Then you go for their teaching university, substantial teaching, but not less of research, the process. And then ultimately degree giving autonomous colleges, which will give you undergraduate education. So this is one thing which will ultimately, anyhow, UGC chairman is here today, so we will have the advantage of hearing from him, because I know that he has been pushing quite a lot of things which should have been done much earlier and which has been held up. And I would like to compliment you for that part of the work that he has done in the short period in which he has taken over. He has made an impact on this. And we have also the other person who is Daniel is really has put the technical education faster. He has got several items of the and policy which have been identified. He has got the orders issued, and there are many things that are in open, including the languages, the way the National Education Technology Forum, and many other things. I just thought I will intervene in this kind of a thing just to tell that we have now in this discussion, as you rightly said, people who will also look at it from the institution, from the government point of view, how to take it forward. The other thing that I would like to say is that we have also recommended the university restructuring. And the model, I don't want to go details into that model of that, but the model is more or less similar to what we have for the IITs and IISc. The reason why we thought is that one of the better models, and you can certainly tune it to a better system, but by and large, the question of what should be the governing system, what is the role of the Vice Chancellor and where does he stand in the overall governance, and then the downstream faculty and things of that kind. So that is the other part of it. And the community and many other kinds of interfaces also comes into picture. And then you have also these verticals with respect to the management of the overall higher educational system, where we have got higher education institute, this thing that has been very clearly presented in one of the presentations. And the HEAs will have the grant giving, accreditation, regulation, and also standard setting. So there are 4 elements. So why I am repeat these things, I am just summarizing in the context of the points that I want to make, is that ultimately, when we move towards in the next 10 years to the new thing, how does the many ideas of this, I heard most of it carefully, taken down my own notes on this, but I am very clear, they are all well fitting into a framework where when the new policy comes into picture and we are able to move into the new policy, certainly these will be the key elements which will be already taken care of in through the recent order. So to that extent, that is there. The other point I'd like to make is I did go through your 5 or 6 themes. They are well chosen, thoughtfully chosen in the context of the academic areas, the areas which are related to administration and governance, areas related to research and industrial interfaces, and things that these are some of the very key elements which you would have seen was a part of this thing. So on that particular point, I think the recommendations that are made is coming from people who have been day in and day out working in this area. So I don't think that I can have a special opinion on this particular thing. Certainly, they are all welcome inputs to moving the NEP. That much I can tell you. But the most important thing is what is not mentioned. And I don't want to go into the details of what is not mentioned and what is chosen. Obviously, you cannot have the entire 400 pages, the original document, or the 60 pages of the second document to be covered in an INAE exercise of this kind that you have enunciated. This itself is very creditable, but we need to move it further. So my suggestion in this connection would be that what I have tried to do before I came, I wanted to do a little bit of exercise instead of walking into this room. And what we did is, I went through our NEP document and looked at the 5 areas: accreditation, academic aspects, faculty and teaching aspects, research and development, and administrative aspects. These are the 5 areas which you have identified. And looked at each of the policy document we had seen has a vision and an anchoring items of policy. So how does these 5 areas fit into this? So I have mapped these 5 areas into the actual policy document. And I have put it down here. This I have done more because of the fact that I wanted to point out that we can do this kind of a transformation and then do a kind of a transformation from here to what you have done in these areas. And this will considerably aid not only the INAE, but the entire community which is going to be involved in the implementation, whether it is at the academic level, at the management level, at the leadership level, or policy making level. So I thought this would be a very useful thing to have a transition in that. So I have made a small note here. This will avoid you to read the painful process of a 400-page document or even 60-page document, but certainly will give you enough clues as to how reshaping. So my final conclusive remark is that this is a very apt set of the themes that you have identified. Presentations are very comprehensive. It comes from the best academics in this country. You cannot get better than this in this area. And most importantly, those are the starting point for looking at the implementation strategy vis-a-vis, because when it comes to things like what Professor Chakravarti mentioned, the question of a cloud computing system or infrastructure to be established, these are not the kind of things on which we should have any hesitation. It's a question of, if NEP has not mentioned about it, obviously they have overlooked it because they are so critical. So we could not have overlooked it because we have had enough people to look into this kind of a thing. So keeping this in mind, my suggestion is kindly look at this, see whether there are things which can be made more complete in the process. So far as the inputs are concerned from the honorable academic members, I think they are very comprehensive. I have no doubt on that. And I am sure that we will hear from each one of the distinguished panel members what they feel about the presentation. And their inputs also will be obviously available. So their inputs are available, the kind of this 40-page notice available to you. And then we can also think of a next step for this, because I don't think I can spare INAE in this area by saying that I have completed my job. I think I'm sure both of them who are in the process of implementing, they would like to use your intellectual prowess in trying to see whether they are doing it in the right way or not. So there are already both Professor Ks Kumar and Anil Satrapati here, but many others who are also a part of the stakeholding community would need this. So we should have a next step in this. Maybe in the conclusive phase, we can just see what is possible in this. Thank you very much.
Sir, thank you so much. Sir, can I have your permission to share it with?
No problem.
Yeah, because
it is a part of the policy itself, okay, which is in the public domain.
So I can share with the
yes,
conveners
please.
of the
please,
five
yes.
panels and so on. So can I have one slide, Cornell, displayed? So I would like to seek now opinion from the heads of the regulatory bodies, UGC, ICT, and so on. But before that, I just want to project one slide and just bring to your notice the two aspects. If you look at the title of today's panel discussion, Opportunities and Challenges. So we have taken the liberty of identifying the novelty and opportunities on the left side and challenges on the right side. So in academia, knowledge is the ultimate aim. And knowledge, if it is a coin, has two sides. One part is the teaching or the dissemination. The other side is the creation through research. So obviously, they must supplement or complement each other. And NEP says that. It also says it has to be holistic and multidisciplinary. NEP talks about flexible credit system, credit bank, and transfer. Now, these are concepts which, some of which already are practiced to some extent in some of the higher education institutions, but now we are talking these aspects as national policy. It's for the first time we are talking about age is not a restriction, is not going to be a restriction for somebody who wants to acquire education. Is something very, very ambitious, but also is very desirable. It talks about multiple entry and exit, talks about flexibility and interdisciplinary engineering education. Skill enhancement, now not just a certificate, but someone having the required skill to implement in practice. So this is an emphasis. It talks about greater use of digital and distant education provisions as a supplementary tool, not necessarily as the primary tool. No machine can actually replace a teacher in front of a blackboard altogether. The international component is very important. National Research Foundation is a very new concept. And one clarity we found today from Dr. Kasturangan, that it's basically going to be a coordinating body. The biggest hope that NEP has created in the academic world is this one single pronouncement, sir, 6% of GDP. For a 3 trillion economy, $3 trillion US economy, 6% is about 180 billion US dollar. So about 200 billion US dollar per year outlay is a dream, but we must also have enough capacity to absorb that. So we have to raise ourselves to that level. But then anything which only promises good and no challenges is probably more of a ideality and not a reality. So the challenges are listed on the right side. We have to understand that this country is not a monolith. It has a lot of heterogeneity in terms of geography, background, various languages, and so on and so forth. There's a wide band of quality available in various institutions. In terms of NIRF, if you compare engineering institutions from 1 to 100, obviously you're talking about a very wide variation. Admission processes have to be restrictive because, unfortunately, we have a very large denominator. So the process often becomes elimination and not selection. The fee structures vary quite a lot across the institutions. There is a large difference in terms of infrastructure and skill sets available in government and private institutions. The autonomy is not always equally available in various university and college systems, be it in government or outside. Coordination between the regulatory bodies also will be very, very necessary. The credit bank and transfer is a concept that the country first has to realize what it is and then have a very robust mechanism of management and implementation. The age limit and validity of registration. Age is not the problem. The problem will come from the validity of the registration, particularly, for example, for PhD or certain such academic exercise. The problem doesn't remain alive forever. Similarly, the employer's expectation, namely the industries, are they going to get what exactly they want? And the last and most important point is engineering without industry participation is almost like creating a solution looking for a problem. So we have to connect with the industry. So this is in the nutshell what we are looking at. So now it is, I'm sure all of us are looking forward to hearing from the regulatory bodies. And Professor Jagdish Kumar, himself a very, very renowned professor in electrical engineering and having a very wide experience in academic exercise for a long time, and is now heading the largest regulatory body of the country, University Grants Commission. And UGC is not responsible only for technical institutions, for the entire ecospace of tertiary education in the country. So obviously, magnitude-wise, volume-wise is mind-boggling. And you have already started certain interventions, Professor Kumar. We are aware from the press reports, which shows that you are extremely serious to implement NEP 2020 in right earnestness. And our chief guest, Dr. Kasturirangan, also mentioned about that. So we would like to hear from you some of the key interventions that you want to go ahead with. Over to you.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share some of my thoughts with leaders in education and industry. I have known Professor Kasturirangan as my chancellor at JNU. He was like a father figure, always advising me when I was going through a very turbulent period at JNU. Thank you, sir. I have been in IIT system for decades, both as a student and faculty member. I still teach at IIT Delhi. But I was also fortunate to learn about the university system when I worked at JNU from 2016 to 2022. Today, in our educational, higher educational system, we have close to about 4 crore students. And in near future, it is going to go to about 10 crore students. But even if you look at the present numbers, if you consider the institutes which are leading in our country, such as IITs and other similar institutes, perhaps less than 2% or 3% of the students, of these 4 crore students, are in these leading institutes. But the rest of India, the rest of the students of this huge number, they are spread across thousands of colleges, nearly 45,000 colleges, and about 1,050 universities. Whenever we talk about higher education, our attention turns to some of these best institutes about which all of us are very proud. But as a regulator, both at UGC and at AICTE, we are concerned about the rest of student community which are spread across these institutes. And fortunately, the national education policy has shown the pathway to look at these institutes and see how they can be strengthened so that the teaching learning processes and the research ecosystem in these universities and colleges will improve. Having said that, let me just tell you a small story. You know, a tribal leader, he was going in a forest along with his about 10 or 20 followers. And they were hunting, they went for hunting, but after a few days they lost in the forest. And whatever food they had, water they had, they already consumed. And they thought they were about to, die, they may not survive. They were tired and they were sitting somewhere. And suddenly one of the members of this group, he took out a small bottle and in that there is a little water and he gave it to the leader. And the leader asked, "Is there enough water for all these 20 people here?" He said, "No, I have only this much of water and I want to give it to you." Leader said, "No, I will not drink this water." I think that is how, when we are in a leading position, we should be inspiring others and we should be standing by those who are in need of help. I think some of the best institutes in our country, they need to be in a leading position in terms of implementing the national education policy. For example, we have the Academic Bank of Credits scheme, and how many of our best institutes in the country have actually registered in this ABC portal? If you look at the numbers, we don't find the leading institutes there, whereas Academic Bank of Credits is one of the greatest reforms that we have introduced in our education. The Academic Bank of Credits is going to integrate the right from childhood, right from the school until the student comes out of the higher educational institute. The credits they acquire, they are going to be put in this bank. It's going to be an integrated approach in monitoring the progress and the skills and the knowledge our students acquire. So do we have our leading institutes as part of this ABC? I don't think so. And also, one of the freedom that we have given to our students through UGC is that they can do up to 40% of the credit requirements of their program outside their own institute. Can these leading institutes open up and provide that opportunity from the universities and colleges which may not be as fortunate? Now that we have the online education which is so well received, and also we have enough technology in our country, why can't our top institutes start online programs in emerging areas and in other areas, so that the students who are in a remote place will have access to high quality education? You will be surprised to know that nearly 40 to 45% of our universities are located in rural areas. They do not have enough infrastructure. They do not have well-trained teachers. They do not have enough funding. Can we open up our doors so that those students can actually benefit? You know, when I say when we are in the leading position, we also should be inspiring to others. Take the question of accreditation. We have the National Assessment and Accreditation Council, and during last 1 year, we have introduced a lot of reforms there to encourage the colleges and universities and other educational institutes to get accredited. This is one of very important processes for any educational institution because we need to provide education of certain standards in our educational institutes. And how do I know whether I am providing that kind of education in my institute unless a third party evaluates me? And NAAC does that. And again, I would like to know our leading institutes, are they part of this accreditation process? Well, you have NBA for program accreditation, but at an institutional level, if we want to accredit, do we have our best institutes as part of the accreditation process? I don't think so. I think the leading institutes also have to play a greater role in inspiring and in hand-holding with the colleges and universities which are spread across the country. It's a kind of self-criticism also for me because I also come from the same system, from the IIT system. I have seen how we think only within the boundaries of the IIT system. We don't think outside, that there is a greater world outside. Time has come to see beyond the boundaries of our own institutes and look at the rest of the country. In the recent past, we have, through UGC, we have implemented many reforms. I have looked at the recommendations that my colleagues have made. I have great respect to them. And if you turn the clock back 10 years ago, if we sat in a meeting like this, and if we discussed about higher education, perhaps we would have made similar recommendations. And today we are making the same recommendations. Unless we implement, unless we work out an action plan and a time plan and start implementing, perhaps after 10 years we'll be making same recommendations, we'll be discussing the same thing. So time has come for implementation. When we want to implement, it is more about changing attitudes. You know, one of my colleagues said implementation of NEP is more engineering. I would say it is more social engineering. Because first the attitudes of people has to be changed. There will be obviously a lot of resistance because most of us, we try to stay within our own comfort zone, and any change, even if it is good, we will try to resist. So how to overcome this resistance? So one of the things is to create awareness. Again here, I would like to see our IITs and other leading institutes in the country going to the rural areas, going to the district level places and organizing workshops and seminars. You know, often our thinking revolves sitting in an AC room and thinking in a city environment. Go to a district level college and talk to those faculty and students. How many of them are aware of the elements of NEP? You will be surprised to know that many of them, they are not aware. So we play a very, very key role in creating this awareness. You know, as a regulator, I have seen, I was a member of the University Grants Commission for 3 years, and many of us also have seen how our regulatory bodies have worked during the last few decades. You know, I must say there is not much to celebrate. how the regulatory bodies have actually functioned. As a regulatory body, I feel that the regulatory body has to facilitate the growth of higher education in our country rather than trifling with all kinds of rules and regulations. Fortunately, the national education policy again has provided us a vision to transform ourselves into organizations which will handhold the stakeholders, in this case our educational institutions, the faculty members and the students, and make sure that our job is not over by simply announcing a regulation or a guideline and posting it to people, but sit with the stakeholders, understand their challenges in implementing some of these reforms, and identify those people who can implement effectively in a shorter time, work with them and see that these reforms are implemented on the ground, so that that will work as a motivation to the other institutes. I think time has come for us to work together. We should not be in silos. We should not consider that we are some of the leading institutes and the rest of the universities and colleges, they will take care of themselves. No, I think we need to work in a collective way. And when we work in a collective way, I think we also need to see right from the school level to the college level to the higher education level in an integrated way. And I have no doubt that the exercise that INAE has taken up today will help us to critically think about how we are planning to implement the national education policy, and what is that lacks in effectively implementing the national education policy. And then do not raise your hands. Look at the possibilities. While we should be aware of the constraints that may have, work like a real engineer. A real engineer always tries to find solutions to the problems that we have. And that is what I would like to see when leaders in industry and academia join together. I think we should be thinking and we should be discussing about the solutions that can be implemented while being aware of the challenges that we have. So with those comments, I would like to stop here.
Thank you very much, Professor Kumar. Yeah, no one will doubt that it's a very formidable challenge, and INAE certainly will be more than willing to take it very seriously forward. So continuing.
I also say, because I think what you said, I'm seeing it in spirit. What you're trying to say is happening now slowly. So I think you should keep it up, because I think even as we try to do all the HEA and other things, there is going to time, and by the time it gets streamlined, it's going to have its own delays. And I don't think the whole system can be held up. And so long as you are a commission and you have a consultative process you can use. You can use an INAE consultative process and some other consultative to ensure that what you are issuing as final office order has been already vetted through a system. I don't think we should wait for the further registration of all that we have written down in this, and then we'll lose 1 year, 2 years, and that is not affordable at this stage. I agree with you. There is a sense of urgency, and we should really address this. Good. I'm happy with this. What do you do?
Okay. Just for the continuity's sake, let's hear now from the chairman AICTE, who probably is the custodian of the largest number of engineering institutions in the country, and that too, as I said, with a very wide band of quality and infrastructure. So, Professor Dasgupta, please tell us, how do you think, what are the challenges and how they can be handled so that NEP can be implemented?
Yeah, respected Professor Kasturiranganji, who has given a wonderful policy to the nation in terms of NEP 2020. Dr. Manna and Professor Jagdish Kumar brilliantly told about the challenges and the opportunities that exist for not only all Tier 2, Tier 3 colleges, but even the institutions of excellence to contribute to nation building. And that's a spirit with which collaborations have to happen. Well, in the policy, there are few things which we have started implementing already. taking help from some of these institutions like IITs, their faculty. Some of them have given brilliant reports which have been helpful in actually implementing policy in right perspective. Take, for example, our issue of access and equity when we talk about it, and inclusion. We talk about women inclusion, but also in terms of physically challenged students, in terms of children who have special learning disabilities or dyslexic children. Policy talks about all of this. In school education, step by step, something was happening, but in higher education sector, we never imagined the problems of these students and how do we integrate them into the higher education sector. And therefore, we had two committees. In fact, Dr. P.P. Chakravarti is one of them, and then Dr. Balakrishnan from IIT Delhi. They have given a brilliant roadmap as to how in higher education we can integrate students of this nature so that they should not be felt left out. Our Honorable Prime Minister often talks about the last man on the street, so that is what is the spirit. And to get them on board, there are recommendations, and only mere recommendations and announcing is not good enough. So what we have done is, how do we actually implement and start implementing? For that, we said in every state, at least one such center be established where all type of educational content delivery for all variety of people must be available. And we have given 5 crore rupees grant for one such institution. And we would like to have 20 such institutions in the country in 20 different states, so that students from that region, they need not go out. They can study in their respective languages in their respective states. So this is one simple intervention which will help in terms of access and equity. Dr. Kasturi Ranganji, you already talked about teaching higher education in Indian languages. And when we announced this, there were a lot of reactions. How can we do without English? We are not negating the importance of English, but such students who have done their 10th, 11th, 12th grade in local Indian languages and are aspiring to do engineering, and because everything is in English, if they are stepping out of the education system, I think we are doing a great disservice to those, maybe from tribal areas.
Language issue, it's not a passion. This is based on the experience outside. You look at most of the European countries, they think they speak in their own language, think in their own language. And if they did work on the Nobel laureates who got it, most of them did their thinking and research work with using their own mother tongue. This is not something, there is definitely an advantage in trying to use your own mother tongue or local language or the language spoken at home in trying to learn in the early phase. And that is the one that will enable you to learn also science. And science certainly has an advantage if you learn it in your own thing, conceptually and many other ways. So there is some very good research output that is available today to substantiate this. So it is not simply, otherwise we are now condemned to be only learning in English and nothing else. There is no direction at all in this country.
So therefore we took a step forward. We announced
take it forward.
And we also had some of this content from SWAYAM courses, which are in MOOC, translated into these languages. We also had textbooks written and translated into at least 8 languages in the beginning and expanding to 12 languages. Developed a AI-based tool which will do about 80% accurate translation, which then we get it vetted or redone by experts in the language as well as in that subject. So all that exercise which has started reaping benefits actually. I hope more institutions will join the bandwagon, in terms of that. And that is the spirit actually, so that they will understand the subject thoroughly. And these children from such areas, they are living in the nature, and therefore probably their observation power are much better than those who sit in the AC offices in Delhi or somewhere. And therefore probably more innovation, more research will come from such children who will come from such background. In terms of the multiple entry exit, there were some challenges. We needed some support from UGC, which has now come. Otherwise, AICT will announce, but the universities will not accept it. So unless there is a collaboration between 2 regulatory bodies, it was not possible. And thankfully, many of these things have started rolling out within 2 months of his joining. That is a wonderful thing. We should congratulate for taking the things heads on and making it happen. Whether it is simultaneously doing 2 degrees, which was announced only recently, or multiple entry exit where the academic bank of credits, which he often said that even IITs should come on board. Many institutions have come on board, and the mechanism of how these transfer of credits can happen, I think there are some nuances which may have to be worked out, because we all know that even the definition of credit itself is different in different organizations, in different systems. Even the grading is different. There are 10-point systems, 4-point system, 8-point system. So how do you convert one into the other? So there are some challenges. Some committees have already worked on that, exchange how it is possible. And UGC has already seized of the matter. And with ABC in place and all these mechanisms in place, I don't think there is any problem in actually making the multiple entry exit possible. But there are some challenges, because if a student joins a particular program, maybe in economics or maybe in engineering, and does only 1 year of study, there are some common courses which are there in the first year. And if he wants to leave at that point in time, giving a certificate will have some challenge, because he will not be useful, because he has done some common thing which may not fetch him a job or something, for livelihood or for something. And therefore, we must have bridge courses when some student is exiting, to give him some expertise, maybe about 8 weeks of additional training in terms of some skill sets being developed, so that a student going out, because of whatever reason, will become employable. Similarly, when someone from a different background enters into an education, which is maybe in engineering, there may be requirement of some bridge courses in order to become level with the rest of the students. I think this will certainly require a lot of innovation from all universities, and a lot of deliberation, a lot of discussion is required. And several webinars, seminars which we have been undertaking are giving us a lot of input which will be helpful in creating what we call regulations for this purpose. And these SOPs will help then the respective universities to take it forward. I think we are in that space. The most important part of when students come into higher education, their parents or students also are always interested in jobs. Most of them have this habit of looking at jobs, and therefore employability becomes very significant and important. And for employability, not only theoretical knowledge which they earn in the colleges and universities, what they learn outside becomes significant, and therefore we have made internship as mandatory part of the entire education system. So if it is a 8-semester program for engineering, at least 1 semester should be spent in an industry to have first-hand experience about how things work. And for that, there were challenges, big challenges, because we have about 1 million students entering engineering every year. So there are 4 million students in engineering itself. Then we have architecture, pharmacy. If you count the arts, commerce, science graduates, maybe we have 4 crore students. And how do we give internship to so many students? So we started working with industry bodies, whether it is FICCI, NASSCOM, CII, many others, as well as directly with some of the large corporations, whether it is Microsoft or Google or Cisco of the kind, or even Infosys or TCS. And we have onboarded on the portal of internship which we have developed, a robust mechanism of industries pitching for their internship opportunities which they are giving, and students who are interested, and make a matchmaking process. Thereby, students will get internship automatically, especially for Tier 2, Tier 3 institutes who have less industry interaction possible. Those who are in cities like Delhi or Mumbai or Pune or Hyderabad or Chennai, they can easily get into the mold of discussing with industries, but we have taken care of Tier 2, Tier 3 cities through this internship portal. Today, we have more than about 16 lakh internships posted, but the takers have crossed 1 crore. So there are 1 crore students looking for internship, and we are able to provide 16 lakh. And we have some industry people here. My appeal is through you to reach out to others and provide as many internships as possible on this portal. And this is another very interesting and important area. Sir, in the new national education policy, we have talked about Indian knowledge systems, Bharatiya Gyan Parampara, and fortunately, Ministry's cell of Indian knowledge system is established in AICT itself. And we have been supporting in terms of finding out the ancient wisdom, how it is made relevant to today's needs, and how in the part of the curriculum we can bring in some of those aspects so that we become, proud of our heritage on one side, connect it with the present, and how do we take it to future so that even in the form of research, how that knowledge can be made use of. I think that is one area which has been done. And the next very important part is, you are talking about research, but innovation. Ministry's innovation cell is also located. We have started doing innovation activities in all the institutions, not only innovation councils, ranking of institutions on innovation rankings. We have a Smart India Hackathon, which started 4 years ago, has resulted in several small bits of technologies being developed by young undergraduate, second year, third year students, which are so valuable for even industry. I think there are very bright spots which I am seeing, and the new national education policy has paved the way for much more things to be done. I will not go into much more details into that, but what Jagdish Kumar ji is doing and what AICT we are trying to do together with the help of all the IITs, he has already pitched for IITs what they need to do. So I would like to also give one suggestion that all IITs should remember that they are tier 1 very important institutions of national importance, but none of their undergraduate students do their masters and PhD there. They either go abroad and do their masters and PhD, or they will go for jobs. None of them do. Maybe there may be an exception of 1 or 2, but otherwise they all do masters abroad. I'm not against going abroad and doing masters and PhD. But who will come to IITs? It is from these tier 2, tier 3 institute students who do their graduation, undergraduation, post-graduation. They come for PhD and MTech. And if the quality improves in those colleges, you will get a good feeder line, and that will help in improving the quality of research that happens in the higher education institutions. And that is why the Margadarshan or Margdarshak schemes which we have launched, going around your college or your IIT or NIT and then helping them to lift their levels to bring it to the level of at least 10% more, 20% more. You cannot overnight change that, but this mindset change there also can happen by professors from IITs going to these places. So my request and appeal to all of them, and INAE members also, to help us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Dasgupta. It must be a very, very, a problem of a huge magnitude, but you have made already certain very good progress. Cornell, is the Minister of Education, Dr. Sharma, still available?
Some time to break.
Okay, okay, fine. So let me turn then to Secretary ACRB, Professor Sandeep Verma, who is also a very well-acclaimed chemist, synthetic organic chemist, a very well-acclaimed researcher. But he is now holding a position which actually is responsible for funding a large amount of research initiatives in the country in various institutions. And we know very well today's world, teaching without proper supplement of research practically stands no chance to compete with the rest of the world. So, Professor Verma, how do you think agencies like ACRB or in particular DST or DBT or any of these funding agencies, what role can they play to implement NEP 2020 or realize the professed objectives of NEP 2020? In the interest of time, I hate to say that, but I would request the panelists to be little brief as far as possible.
Absolutely, I'll try to do that. Thank you, Professor Manna, Dr. Kasturi Rangan, distinguished panelists. I must admit, sir, that I read NEP 2020 every page several times over, and as an educator and now as a person administering R&D funds across the country, it is really a well-drafted document, sir, and I applaud the work that has gone behind producing such a, forward-looking document which we all can emulate and follow in the times to come. Now, coming to question that Professor Manna raised about how R&D can be intertwined with education and how it sort of synergizes what we offer to our students. It is, I think it's very clear to us, even as a professor back home at IIT Kanpur and now, that the emerging trends in research, whatever is cutting edge, when we are funded by government agencies and we are working on it, we are not only bringing the right expertise in action, but the students and the ecosystem around it, right? We all take our interns. There are undergraduates working with us. There are master students working with us, PhD student, postdoctoral. So the entire gamut of activities that we partake is adding to the value system of teaching. So that comes without saying. And I think what SERB is doing and what DST has done, and they do funding across the board in very frontier areas of research, including national missions, for example, of cyber-physical systems, where students will be exposed to something truly cutting edge. So that is one point. The second thing is that I was listening to especially the Industry Connect and how NEP requires students to get that kind of, as Professor Subhadev pointed out, the internships in the industry and how industry interface while doing academic research is essential. So what I would like to just give you two examples, sir, to all members, that one program that we have been running very successfully has been the brainchild of Professor Manna, which is Imprint program that was launched by our Honorable President and Honorable Prime Minister, where institutions such as IITs and ISC were initially being taken as academic partners and brought together, or the line ministries and industry was brought to conduct research in 10 different focus areas of research. So that program was highly successful, and we have good stories to tell about the outcomes of the support that we have given to academic researchers with the help of industry. Now, sir, it has now moved to a number of phases. So going from Imprint 1, we have fine-tuned to Imprint 2, to Imprint 2C2, and then consortia mode, where a lot of money is being given to really come out with a prototype and a product, if at all a product, right? So that is one. And what we also realized, sir, lately, and I'm really sorry that for the last 2 years, some of our work was really dampened because of the pandemic, but in the meantime, what we were able to do, sir, is to convince 3 leading industry houses, Intel, General Electric, and Applied Materials, to partner with SERB for a co-funding initiative. Sir, it is a unique initiative at the moment in India, where we have promised them to meet 1:1 co-funding if on problems of industry interest. So what we have said is that Intel or General Electric would create a problem set for our academic researchers, because what we realized, sir, that when industry was approaching academicians, it was just the premier institutes, IITs and ISC. And I am also of the view, as Professor Jagdish Kumar was pointing out, coming from a university, I am a BHU product, that talent is diffuse, sir. It is all over the country, and to focus on certain institution may not bring us the right value. So what we told them, when we were able to convince that if you park a certain amount of money with us, we would create that co-funding, and your problems, we will have people from Intel, GE, and Applied Materials. Now Semiconductor Corporation of the US is also trying to partner with us. We will have you on board. You are welcome to evaluate the proposals with us, and the outcomes are going to be followed. Their quarterly progress should be followed by you as well as academics from, say, any institution, I mean, experts in that on that problem sets. And it rang really, sort of, it reverberated with those industries. And what we also told them, that we are not going to take any, we would not have any issues with IPR. It will rest with PI, their institution, and the industry partner, which is co-funding the initiative. So SERB would take 2 steps back after giving you that co-funding. So that really has created, sir, quite a bit of synergy. And I am happy to say 2 calls are out. GE call was out 2 weeks back, and they have given, so GE, sir, has consortia of health, GE Aviation, and GE Energy. So what they have promised us, they would rotate problem sets and they would come out with these calls. and we would have it. So I think I would not go too much into the detail, just touching one point, sir. Lastly, that SERB also has something what we call as National Science Chair, where we have track 2 of leadership in National Science Chair program, where we are looking for superannuated colleagues who would tell us, to tell SERB, that they would be willing to take this chair position and move in state universities, college, and the hinterland of India to bring out what was said by the 2 regulators here, touch the last person standing, or a person who has hunger for education. So we are looking for such role models, sir. So this is just a 2-year-old program. We hope that it would catch on, and we would have enough colleagues who are really wise and they have quite a bit of expertise in their area to bring it to the state universities, college, and whoever is willing to take their advice and make use of their expertise. I'll stop here for the want of time. Thank you so much, sir.
Good initiative,
sir.
But what is more important to me, attractive is the fact you're looking for the outcome. It is not a open-ended inputs for research and not expecting much to happen. I think you're keeping a tight control on the outcomes.
Right, sir. Very tight control.
Scheduling it and retuning it and all that kind of a thing that you need to do to manage a research. I'm very happy that is the essence of what we should do now on the research. Because only out of the 4 levels of research in the country, pure research, applied research, translational research, and research ultimately going into the industry or strategic application, first one seems to have succeeded. But from then onwards, the trouble starts. So we needed the 3 steps, we really need to look at it in the country, because that is why the NRF and many other kinds of institutional mechanisms like one you said are very clear, very, there is an imperative for this now. We cannot have this 5% and 6% of the total, or 18 per lakh is the kind of number when you talk to 300 and 400 in other places, and it is stuck at 0.69. People always say that as a reason. If you ask me, I've been seeing the 0.69 for many, many years now. It's only because the offtake is very poor, the country. The question of taking the money that is available for research and then show results in time, that is very poor. So you are getting what you can give the outcome from, and that is where we are in trouble. So we need to create this large workforce for research, quality workforce, and create all mechanisms, including the university, 900 universities that we addressed, even though there may be few of them were not bad. But certainly there's a major issue here. And so I'm happy that you said this.
Thank you very much, Sandeep. And through you, I also thank Secretary DST. In fact, he is stuck up somewhere, and I persuaded him that if he cannot come, then Chairman ACRB must come. So he obliged us, and thank you. And by the way, Professor Verma actually is returning straight from Jodhpur. He came straight from the airport. So thank you again. May I now turn to Dr. Goel, not because he was president of INAE, but because he heads National Innovation Foundation. And engineering automatically demands innovation in terms of product design and process design. So, Dr. Goel, what do you think NEP 2020 offers to hone the skills of innovation in our education system? Which way can it promote and which way can it actually help the industry?
Thank you very much, Professor Manna, for making me part of this brainstorming and very educative session, and particularly because the architect of the NEP is here, so that's also a good opportunity to learn. I just will have few points, few observations with respect to the NEP. My first observation was I had a chance to interact with some of these, I would say, very learned people who were aspirants for the directorship of the IITs, 33 of them. And my understanding was that basic understanding of the NEP probably needs to be spread much more. Everywhere I got the impression that they want to educate everyone with the multidisciplinary research. My understanding of multidisciplinary research comes from the example of Professor Dhawan. He did his MA in English and could do PhD in aeronautics. And that's the kind of a flexibility one is talking about. It's not that everyone has to do forcibly a multidisciplinary study in B level or ME level, or I think that was a misconception which I thought probably we need to really educate, or maybe more workshops like this are required for giving this particular meaning. Second comment I had was that today, when we really look at the education system, and rightly brought out by both of the regulators, that large, particularly engineering, my guess is more than 80% of the engineering education comes from the private universities. And maybe out of that, 10% are really doing very job, right? Like you are also director of a private university, or Professor Ghosh is also there. They are doing excellent job. But most of them, they are really kind of a family-run business. The father will be the, the man will be the director, or no, not director, chancellor, wife will be pro-chancellor, son will be director, and some family members will be. Now that kind of system exists in a large level. Now, NEP has to address that issue also. Actually, there was a suggestion that recently, when we were interacting with the Minister, Honorable Minister, Mr. Dharmendra Pradhan, he suggested that can we not have a panel of directors every year for IITs and just pick up rather than having individually. My thinking was, to particularly Dr. Kasturirangan, one can think of creating a panel for directors even to private universities. Intervene somewhere so that this education does not become a pure business. I mean, some business is all right, but it has become a pure business. So that's another point I just wanted to say. Third comment I just want to make was with respect to this so-called unemployability. I don't believe in this concept. To me, what is important is, are we creating a student to learn? The moment we create the students or make them, teach them to learn, then they are no more employed. I can give my own example. When I studied my ME in control systems and BE in the electrical system, and I was asked to do control system for the satellites, I had absolutely no understanding of the control system or how satellites are stabilized. I had to learn everything. And we learned related subjects, including propulsion, including mechanical engineering, including rigid body dynamics, flexible dynamics. All that we learned on job. So the question is, are we we don't have to really worry about the employment in the context of he should learn what is going in the industry. Once he joins the industry, within a month he can pick up. But are we teaching them to learn? That point was brought out by Professor Chakravarti also. I totally agree with that. I think our focus has to be teaching to learn. One other comment I just wanted to make was with respect to the NRF. Also, to some extent, SCRB. And we discussed this thing maybe about 15 years back in the context of one, when we were discussing with Dr. Chidambaram in the context of the, I think it was a 5-year plan. Directed research. Actually, when you really look at the way US funding agencies work, for science funding agency, the most of it is directed. Someone directed that, okay, next time 30% of the money will go only for energy. They are pumping almost $10 billion a year in energy funding. So I'm not trying to say that we should do only direct research, but there should be a proportion between the blue sky research and the directed research. And that has to be done both by NRF as well as SCRB. I think we have to do that kind of a thinking. Coming to your point with respect to the innovation. Actually, NIF is largely focusing on the grassroots innovation. And actually, our innovators are, some of them are illiterate, some of them are maybe high school or maybe less than high school. In fact, we are getting a lot of children who are giving innovative ideas, and they come from the standard below 10, 5th standard, 6th standard, and we are getting a lot of innovations in that sense. So point is that our focus now is how to really translate that innovation, because those are innovative ideas. Or maybe a farmer has done some innovative work, he has really done how to put a seed or how to plant with a mechanized way. Now, his success rate is 70%. Now, what we are trying to do is how to make it 70 to 90% and make it a kind of a into the industry. So, our effort now is more towards spreading those innovations, firstly bringing them TRL level to 4 or 3 to 4 to 7, 8, and then bring it to the industrialization. I think this is where, and that's in that sense, I think what we were doing is essentially matching with what NEP is really conceiving. So I would say that that the concept is a matching and is a kind of synergy which we are, and we would like to do much more in this direction of how to translate these innovations from, let's say, just from idea or maybe prototype to the actual products. This will be our focus. And I think that way we match with respect to aspirations of the NEP. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Goel. I think it's time we should hear from the industry leaders here. As I said, yeah.
Pandit, sorry, I have a flight to catch at 9:50, so I will be leaving at 7:45 or 7.
Would you like to add one or two sentences?
Yes,
right now?
I mean, I just have 4 points to make.
Yeah, please go ahead.
There are 4 succinct points to be made in 4 sentences. That's what I wanted to communicate. In whatever discussions have been happening outstanding, I think we can put NEP implementation in 3 specific stages, as I feel it. First is evaluate the existing infrastructure and do only reorganization and restructuring of the available resources to see whatever points of NEP can be implemented without allotting any additional resources. In second stage, identify those deficiencies and put partial resources to complement and supplement those. And in third stage, create a whole lot of new infrastructure which is necessary to implement the policy in totality. The second point which I would like to make is related to the regulatory bodies. Unless, especially in the case of a higher education, unless the recruitment rule for the academic positions in terms of this degree, that degree are completely revised, we will find no takers for these multidisciplinary policies which we are trying to promote. This is point number 2. So it is necessary that regulatory bodies also should work hand in hand with the NEP's, the basic philosophy and the basic spirit of implementation of the NEP. The third point which I wanted to make again is we used to have a workshop practices which was a starting point of the vocational training. It was removed in between. So none of the workshops are functional. But at the same time, many skilling institutes have started. And the existing infrastructure in this skilling institute can be harnessed, can be used by the local universities to train the people in the vocational part. Starting at a school level is outstanding, but it is still going to require a lot of resources. But the existing infrastructure which is already created, if it can be implemented, can be utilized, I think the addressing of vocational education for practicing engineers is definitely going to be useful. And the last point which I wanted to make is National Research Foundation. You will find even in NSF, US NSF, as was talked about by Anurag Kumar, majority of the funding of NSF is captured by top ranking institute in the US. The second ranking institute, so to speak, the 2-tier institutes, usually get a huge lot of funding from the industry where the projects are short term. NSF funded projects are essentially futuristic and long term projects. So similarly, the mindset which Sandeep talked about is necessarily changed to be introduced in the industry, where industry sponsors short term projects, application oriented projects, where the outcome will definitely come out quickly, and that will also give confidence to the industry to start participating in the NEP implementation. Just last point, any academic is expected to do 4 roles, to play 4 roles: teaching, primary, followed by research, which is complementary and supplementary to the teaching, because new knowledge is being created which is shared with the students. Third, industrial interactions, because that industrial interaction allows him to identify the real life problems as well as the projects which he or she is likely to take up for research. And the fourth is a scholarly writing, which is publishing part, that allows you to focus your thoughts in a very concise, precise and unambiguous manner, which also helps in teaching. So if this, and in 360-degree feedback which we get from a faculty, if equal weightages are given to all these 4 aspects of academic activity, I think it will do wonders for it. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak, and sorry to barge in like this.
No, thank you very much, Professor Pandit. I know many of us here actually have come today only, arrived in the afternoon, and are also returning back tonight. So thanks for joining and sharing your very useful thoughts. So as I said, it's time we should hear from the peers of the industry. Let me begin with Mr. Krish Gopalakrishnan. We often hear something which is almost like often quoted, that lack of industry-academia interaction. We've been, at least I've been hearing ever since I started research. We also hear the industry often complaining that many of the students who actually join fresh are not quite up to the mark, are not able to perform to the expectation of the industry. So what do the industries expect from a fresh graduate, engineering graduate? Why is it that the industry is not always willing to come together with an academic institution to pursue a research topic of their own? I'm told particularly in IT sector, or so to say computer science area, many of the companies would like to actually have their own R&D, which is absolutely essential, but are not very much willing to come and collaborate with academia in pursuing certain research goals. That could be because of confidentiality clauses, or maybe they have certain time frame in mind which is very different. So what kind of skill sets are expected from the fresh graduates, and what kind of opportunities do industries see from NEP 2020? And you have been a veteran of the industry and also happen to be part of an exercise which is one of the biggest success stories of the country. So I think you are most well poised to give us certain clues as to which way we should proceed.
So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me and giving me this opportunity. You know, Professor Kasturirangan and his team, Dr. Kasturirangan and his team have worked for more than 2 years on this, and for me to, kind of talk about implementation within 5 minutes would be probably an impossible task, but but I will make an attempt, because you asked me, and many of you are living, breathing, academic work. I'm not. So I'm only trying to re-articulate some of the things that I heard and summarize these things actually. First thing, I feel that there has to be an implementation team that works on this for the next 10 years. Continuity is very, very important. Even if people change, there has to be a process in place such that there is continuity in implementation. I think it's very, very important. Otherwise, things could drop, and INAE participating in this probably could, create that institutional continuity. Regulators also, if can think about sustaining these initiatives, I think it's very important. And I always say, and Professor Kasturirangan has heard about this, succession planning in regulatory bodies is something that we need to institutionalize. There is no concept of succession planning in any of our institutions. In industry, succession planning is very important. If we don't think about succession planning, we are seen as not taking our responsibilities seriously. So I think we need to think about succession planning in regulatory bodies also, and bring in the next set of leaders early on, have an overlap of maybe 6 months or a year, transition properly. Anyway, so that's my first point. And added to this, I also feel that a directory of teachers and directory of leaders is something that we need to start building. So that, I think there was a suggestion that the next director is to be chosen for an IIT. We just go to the pool and say that, you have been selected as a leadership, you have been trained as a leader, so now you get an opportunity to become a director. Right? So we will now start thinking about leadership development very seriously. What are the relevant experiences that they need, etc. Now, these are, some of the things I believe is implied in the NEP, but I think we need to implement it. So that's my next point, which is, I think the implementation has to think about systems, processes, and structures, right? And it's part of the regulatory infrastructure. And to me, a regulator has two roles: enabling role and enforcing role. We today think about regulators as enforcers. We don't think about regulators as enablers. I think we need to think about, first you enable, then you can think about enforcing, and enforcing probably should be an exception rather than a rule. Enabling should be the primary role of a regulator, because they have the wherewithal to think about enabling this. And so, to me, systems, processes, and structures. So systems, for example, it talked about I think it talked about the accreditation thing, right? Banking of credits, right? So that's clearly a system and a structure that has been created. We need to figure out how we can make it happen, right? How we can make compliance happen, etc. Initially, it could be voluntary, but at some point, voluntary translates to compliance, and we need to move towards that actually. And we can have a open source software that any institution can use, which will automatically connect their internal systems to these platforms, etc. I think it can be very quickly developed, and so we can figure out how to make these systems and processes help us implement the NEP policy as quickly as possible. I also feel that in order to accelerate the implementation of NEP and talked about transfer of credits and things like that. Any course that you want others to take, any student to take, etc. Any course that can be used for this transfer of credits, etc., that can be initially accredited, or that can be banked, right? So we can have a database of courses that anybody can take. So that's actually a simpler procedure than looking at a full institution getting accredited and things like that. So a course, if you say, okay, this course is available at this institute, anybody can take it, and that will also allow somebody in Assam to take this course and also get the credit, because now these courses are there, the database is there, what is the prerequisite, what is the output, and you expect, outcome you expect, etc. all can be there online. And this can be offered by a private university, this could be offered by a government institution, and these are now standardized. And so it's a simpler process to standardize than the entire institutional framework, etc. When it comes to structure, I'll just give you one example. The NMICPS that SCRB is supporting. Now, it's a very well thought out thing. It's taking off from IIT Madras Research Park. So you create a hub in an institute which specializes in certain things. So for example, IIT Hyderabad specializes in autonomous systems. IISc Bangalore in robotics, AI and robotics and things like that. So that hub becomes a center of excellence on that. It takes the research and look at translational work and entrepreneurship. It allows students to take internship. It allows industry to fund it and join hands with the hub, because 50% of the funding can be should be outside the institution, and longer term, industry has to fund the hub, where the government will no more fund it. So this is an institutional mechanism which is jointly managed by, let's say, NIT Hyderabad and industry. They will identify 2-3 industry partners to do that. The funding resides there. And if you go and visit that, the hub of activity that is there is amazing. I've visited few of them. IIT Kanpur I visited, IIT Hyderabad I visited, IIT Madras, IISc. It's truly amazing the kind of work that is being done there. And this will also allow us to hold on to our BTech people or BE people, because they now see what is possible. Cutting edge, leading research that is being done in these places. And it also allows our teachers to become entrepreneurs, because, again, it gives them the pathway to do these things. This is one example of a structure. So this is a structural solution to implement NEP. A research park is a structural solution to implement NEP, where all of the things that we talked about can be actually implemented. Now we need many more. We created 25 hubs. We need many more, and we need to fund these things for 10, 15 years. See, in the last 10 years, we have seen that the startup ecosystem has really taken off. But why? Because we accept that 90% will fail. We accept that failure. Now, we should accept that research is open-ended, research could have failures, and we should continue to fund them for the next 10 years, etc. It's not that accountability is not there, but it's that we set proper expectations on what outcomes we expect, etc. You need to show progress, you need to show, that activities are moving in the right direction, money has to be spent wisely, etc. But the results could be taking much longer, and some of them could fail also, and there may be some mistakes made along the way also. But these structures allows us to implement many of the things that we talked about, because our academic institutions have to evolve to become centers of research, innovation, and entrepreneurship. That continuum, I'm very clear in saying that is very much necessary if you want to truly implement the spirit of NEP. So I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very, very important point, that we have to create the true ecosystem so that eventually it translates all the way to a company or real product. So, Dr. Bhattacharya, over to you now. Now, Mr. Gopalakrishnan spoke primarily as a peer from the IT or computer science or digital industry side. In hardware, we all are aware that there's a large investment and skill sets are also very different. So what do you see, which way NEP really can be beneficial to industries like yours?
Yeah. Dr. Kasturirangan, Dr. Manna, Mr. Chris Gopalakrishnan, first of all, thank you very much for giving the opportunity. It is on. Maybe I'll speak into this one. Yeah. This is better now?
Just go ahead. They should be able to hear us.
Yeah, okay. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak here, be here and speak here. Knowing the time shortage, I'll be brief, broad brush analysis and views. See, from a manufacturing industry perspective, there are two requirements. First is the requirement of the drumbeat of the regular billions of dollars, right? Which is, it has to be regular, has to be predictable, has to be systematic and repeatable. For that, you need to run the mills, the factories in a predictable, systematic manner. You need engineers, you need knowledge and skill at different levels. The requirement is not necessarily specifically that you need a mechanical engineer or an electrical engineer or a chemical engineer. You need the person who's running a mill needs basic knowledge of all. Right? He will need help from people who are hands-on and have probably diploma holders. So you need skill, broad-based engineering skill, and some knowledge which can direct that skill. So in this respect, having broad engineering knowledge is more important than having siloed mechanical engineer coming in and running a chemical plant. Or, that's too siloed, and it also prevents movement of that person later across the industry, across even the same industry, right? So it's almost like MBBS. Like when a person passes MBBS, he becomes a general practitioner. But he's not a specialist. And that brings me to the next level, the second part of industry, is the disruption of innovation. The whole one of the core purposes of NEP and whatever we are doing in the nation today is to make us as Atmanirbhar, to be self-reliant, a leader in the world, and from our perspective, in manufacturing. Right? And in order to be able to be an international leader, you need to be able to to solve our problems in our way, with our technology. And that technology doesn't come, as somebody was mentioning TRL levels, Dr. Goel was mentioning TRL levels, and TRL level 1 to 9 being the scale. You can't just come in right at the end and bring in a new technology. It has to happen throughout. And it happens with collaboration between academia, with research labs, and industry. Various amounts at various stages, but it needs to be throughout with clear focus. And that focus is national requirements. I'm still talking about the second aspect, right? And unless we do that for industrial problems of today and of essentially today, but the solutions may come tomorrow, we will not be international leaders. We will keep on buying rather than making. We'll be dependent on imports rather than making ourselves, giving solutions to the world. To achieve this, you need a different set of people. Our experience has been that the people who would take forward the second part, they generally reside in industrial R&Ds. Typically, Indian industry has weak industrial R&D. So we don't necessarily have, that's what typically, right? Some industries do have strong industrial R&Ds. And we see the people who come into the R&Ds from the Indian system have a different acumen, different training. So people with MTechs and PhDs generally do well in the R&Ds. The fresh BTechs don't. And it could be a nature of the teaching that they go through. And it could be even BTechs from IITs who don't necessarily do well in the R&Ds. So the R&D part of industry is extremely important to bridge gaps in the TRL levels. The language that is spoken across the TRL level in academia, in research labs, in the CSIR labs, the language, in terms not necessarily English, the technical language that is spoken are different. And it is the people in our industrial R&D who need to translate those language and bridge the gap. We talked about why industry-academia interaction doesn't happen, because we lack that strong industrial R&D in India. And that will be built once manufacturing faces the reality that we need to be international leaders, and we need to make rather than buy. And it will come when, say, just to take an example, carbon capture and utilization to solve the carbon problem. There is no utilization solution in the world, and it will be all geography specific. We can't do sequestration today in India, which Northwest Europe can. So we need to find our own solution. Just to give one example. So we need to make rather than buy. When we face these problems, we need to have industry-ready people for industrial R&D. And I think the NEP and the solutions that we were talking about, broad-based, having industrial R&D centers co-located with university at the, say, IIT Madras Research Park, all this will help. So there are two aspects, again. One is the drumbeat of the billions of dollars, needs a broad-based, almost MBBS-like engineering curriculum. and the research-based industrial R&D system, which will need more specialists, the MD types, if I can continue with the comparison with medical, cardiac specialist, bone specialist, etc. So you'll have a metallurgical specialist, a fluid flow specialist, who can then use the same language as is being used in academia. And very, very importantly, I'll take the example of imprint. Very, very important to have the TRL levels bridge. There are multiple valleys of death, especially when research translates from academia to, say, CSIR and CSIR to industry. These valleys of death need to be bridged. And they will be bridged when you have that triangle working. And the thread of that triangle is funding. It is extremely important that research funding, especially technology development funding, is de-risked. Industry will participate, and I congratulate SERB for the idea of co-funding in a 1:1 manner. And it's not only the Intel, I'm sure many Indian companies would also be keen to participate in that, to de-risk funding in high-risk in technology development endeavors. When you're going to make, there is risk associated with it because nobody else has done it before. And initiatives such as this will definitely help together with the NAP. So I will stop here.
Thank you very much. I mean, I'm sure all of us heard Devashish talking about some very radical suggestion, BE like MBBS. I mean, just a generalized engineering degree. And similarly, solutions which is India specific. I mean, these are certain things which actually NAP should allow people to think very differently. So, Mr. Kotwal, I know you are a big proponent of system engineering. You have done all your life system engineering, and this is very much similar to what Devashish was trying to say, that when you build an aircraft, you don't necessarily need only aeronautical engineer or mechanical engineer or a particular branch of engineering. You need everybody and beyond engineering. So how can NEP fit in that bill? And which way actually the hardware industry can benefit from NEP?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll digress just a little bit to give the right perspective. I want to touch upon some very important point made by Dr. Kasturirangan when he talked about engineering is not about only the engineering education but the integrated part. I want to stress this point because you asked the question as what do you expect when an engineer joins you? Now, as you know, we have worked on very, very complex systems, and I can tell you that 95% of the people are non-IIT engineers. Okay, they come from various colleges all over, spread out all over the country, and they are still able to achieve certain things. Now, therefore, I think the real engineer is or her mental makeup is made up mostly in the last 4 years of that 5-3-3-4, 9 to 12. During that period, if he or she gets an exposure to some hands-on things like learn by doing is the excellent example that can be given. Now that is something which will build that sense of curiosity, and that is the fundamental requirement for an engineer. When he joins the company, especially ours is L&T is a conglomerate which is there's no standard product we have. So every product is different, every customer is different. So we need that. And therefore, some introduction of something like paramedical you have in that, if some such courses are introduced at 9 to 12, it will help a lot because already he is in the technical area, if it's in engineering or in medical or any other area, and he or she then gets into an industry with already a knowledge. And this is the real secret why a German engineer is really an engineer, whereas an Indian engineer is not an engineer at the end of it. So the second part is segregation into various disciplines. Now, as you rightly put it, every single system today is a conglomeration of several disciplines. It is hard, you can pick up hardly anything which is only mechanical or electrical or chemical. But the person working on it, he need not be an expert in everything, but he has to have a great understanding of the other disciplines. How does that happen? That is something which is very important. The systems approach has got to be introduced in education, and that without that we will find it lacking.
But there's one more aspect which I want to stress, and which is a very, very underestimated kind of faculty, and that is project management. Sadly, it is totally lacking in most of the engineering institutions, and most projects fail not because of any high technology which has failed, but in sheerly managing the various variables to be so that it is done in time. Coming to this implementation part, which you actually, it's good that you raised the first point, it should be about implementation. I want to look at it from a macro perspective. India is a democratic country, will continue to be so. It is going to be a crazy democracy in some parts. It is going to be that. It is therefore something which we have to think of. Having got a great policy in place, it will be very sad if it works the same way as great policies have been stipulated for defense. I mean, I was a member of 2004 Kilgar Committee. I know what we said and how much of it that is implemented. So why does it not get implemented? Let us address that. And if INAE can have a session only focused on implementation and what can be the hurdles for implementation, I'll tell you a simple thing. There is something called a CAB, that Central Advisory Board of Education. I am not clear about the actual composition of it. If that is the body which is going to be implementing it, look at the customer base. Whom are we doing this for? I really compliment Professor Jagdish Kumar. He brought out a very important point. We are not doing it for the cream of the education society. So if that is the case, same kind of, whatever we brought out were recommendations. Supposing it had contained heads of institutions coming from rural areas, would you not have had a totally different set of recommendations? So the point I'm trying to make is the composition of CAB. Let us be clear. The state is a concurrent subject. Education is a concurrent subject. No amount of pressure from the center is going to ensure implementation. Where is the involvement of the states? And a parallel example which we have recently seen, how is GST implemented so successfully? Whatever, after all its pains, it's a fantastic achievement, I must say, with all the complexities of politics, because there's a body, empowered body, which contains finance ministers of all the states. Now, they may agree or disagree, but in that meeting, what is decided, they at least understand it and they own it up. Now, this body, therefore, CAB, must contain the education ministers of all states, forgetting on which party they are from, and also include the rural base, like the university representatives and all that. If that does not happen, this will become a hollow kind of thing with no real muscle and ability to implement. The last point I want to touch upon is the other end of it, the research part. I am a little worried. The reason is, in fact, more than little. You look at our ability to do research in India. As far as talent goes, I have no dispute. It is the best or among the best in the world. Now what is happening is, if we don't do our homework quickly, we are soon going to end up just like, pardon my saying so, even for the IT industry, we have done great work in enhancing IT, but where is that core, innovative, Indian designed R&D, IT for Indians? We don't have a substitute for Google. We don't have our own. So we cannot stand on our own legs. The same GEs of the world have set up their largest R&D centers outside US, they are in India. Intel will welcome that. All these companies will welcome putting up R&D centers in India. It is all IP is not Indian. And therefore, the engineers, the brilliant people working there are unfortunately not going to give us the strength. So this is a worry. Unless we do our homework quickly, we will find our own. Now look at the next generation. It is not going to be doing what at least I have done all my years. Quantum computing or whatever is happening in robotics. Now if that is a thing which we are just going to wait for the world to lead and we follow, the danger is our people will be doing second and third grade work and doing it for others. So this is a danger. I'll give you just last one specific recommendation for the younger generation. I am sure you have heard of the person Dean Kamen, who is one of the greatest inventors. He's got 1,000 patents of his own. He's the inventor of Segway and iBot and all that. He has come out with a very interesting concept. It is called For Inspiration and Recognition of Science and Technology, FIRST, so he calls it FIRST. I have seen that implementation in a kind of competition in Pune. Schools from various colleges, from various places, they came together in a competition on what? On robotics. And I can see the enthusiasm. It is for age group from 8 to 18. Okay? This learning we're doing is so powerful as a tool because it teaches them collaboration. It teaches them how to appreciate technology. In front of our eyes, they designed robots and all that, and the systems were supplied by people from Lego and such people. Now, if we can indigenize and come out with something Indian, with companies who can produce these gadgets in India, it will be a great contribution for developing that curiosity, that ability to learn and pick up new technologies. This is something which I would strongly recommend that we should consider. Thank you.
For the government today, space, atomic energy, and DRDO. The whole system survives because there is a set of knowledgeable people who are in the area of system engineering. The concepts like configuration, control, and management came out of space program, where you try to configure a rocket or a satellite, and any changes in that you try to make in the downstream development. You analyze not only the technical issue, you look at the schedule issue, you look at the financial issue, look at the compromise issue, and are there any other option? So, the ability to look at this kind of thing we have been taught because we were a part of the space program. I personally feel the educational component of this is not something which is very strong in this country. In fact, the only atomic energy courses that were there in Kharagpur was closed down. And there is no educational systems today for atomic energy. Space, they are struggling, but every time you talk about space, they talk about space science and not about rockets and everything. But there are places like IITs which still do some level of things, or look at certain areas of aerodynamics and so on. So what I want to say is that we have mentioned it in the NAB. And this is an area for INAE, not for any other area, because these are all multidisciplinary engineering products. And if you now further extend it to other areas, you see there are plenty of systems and products in this country that would need that capability. We need to look at it a little more carefully, because what I got in those is, the Netherlands organized with Karnataka government a thing. The title of that, to system engineering to solve the problem, that kind of a thing. And then many engineers from India presented the examples of what they have done. They were absolutely thrilled to know that this is the level of familiarity they have got. But they were not a part of an educational system. And today that is needed, even though we call it holistic and integrated and all that. Ultimately, your ability to do system engineering with multiple dimensions of a problem is something which should be a part of the engineering education. And also bring in questions of economics, management, leadership, everything, that kind of a thing. So maybe we should think about it for the future too. But his statement really energized that.
Can I make one comment here? Just one sentence.
Yes.
This is, sir, you will notice that almost all engineering colleges, Professor Sahasrabudhe will tell me, they have got a club which makes racing cars. They have got a club which makes satellites. They have got clubs which make other things. All are extracurricular activities. None of them are curricular. But they are doing that. They have teams, they have economics teams, everything. From first year they join up to final year they are there. We have it in almost all institutions, tier 2, tier 3, everywhere. But everything is extracurricular.
Sir,
we are working on it. Yeah, that's good. This term co-curricular, extracurricular is something really misleading. Ultimately,
please use the microphone here.
Yeah. The term co-curricular, extracurricular actually misleading. We are working on it. Everything will become, including sports, will become part of the curriculum, and they will get the credit.
The credit has to be quantified.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Sir, we have said that such activities should be given credits.
Sure.
I think we should encourage
Sir,
that.
you'll be glad to learn that BIT Mesra created a department called Space Engineering and Rocketry in 1964, before ISRO was created. And IIT Kanpur started a program in nuclear engineering, first of its kind in the entire academia in the country. I pleaded with Chairman Atomic Energy, couldn't manage any funding for that separately. But it is true that academia needs to relook and actually come out with, but some of the suggestions made by Mr. Kotwal are outstanding. And in fact, you're absolutely true that many of these multinational companies, they certainly invest in R&D, but they take away the IP. I mean, the country doesn't quite benefit from that. Well, I mean, the human resource part remains, but that is only a fraction of it. Many of them also find their job elsewhere and then they leave.
And also,
but about the other thing, Mr. Kotwal, you'll be, surprised to learn. Do you know the CABE meeting, CABE meeting can be held only in an auditorium like Vigyan Bhavan, not in a room like this? Because actually all the education ministers of the country sit in that. I've been a part of that in the past. It's very difficult to transact any good, issue there because
500 people sitting there.
Exactly.
No, but it is important to have their presence.
No, I mean,
and
of course
later on
it's
have
needed.
Smaller meeting, because if you don't have that, it is a sure way of ensuring it will not get implemented. That's all.
we also talk about the research ecosystem in our universities and colleges. You will be surprised to know that almost 95% of the universities, they do not have an R&D cell. They do not know how to train their students their faculty members to write successful project proposals. They do not train their faculty members how to manage their project, how to, the purchase procedures and so on. It's only recently that the UGC has issued guidelines for establishing R&D cells in the university system. So this is where I think again leaders, even from industry side also, you should actually adopt some local university or a college and mentor them in doing things. You don't have to fund them. You don't have to do anything. Just in kindness, visit, give some lectures. How many of our top industrialists go to an ordinary college and give lecture on what is happening in today's technology? I rarely see. When I go to a remote college and talk about nanotechnology, I can see the enthusiasm in the faces of those students. And another one, we always talk about industry and academia collaboration. Recently when UGC announced that we are working on establishing professor of practice in university system, there was an overwhelming support. But I think the industry also should come forward. For example, if we give professor of practice position, can the industry experts take up some teaching load in the universities? Today, the online education is there everywhere. It is very, very acceptable. You may be in Bangalore, you may be in Mumbai or somewhere. Can you teach in a local college or a university? Please don't come to an IIT and give a great lecture there, take a course. Go to an ordinary college, offer a full-fledged course and teach them sitting at your home. Many colleges and universities will welcome this kind of industry academia collaboration.
Okay, so there's just one point I wanted, which is important. We talked about that 6% of GDP. My humble suggestion is that out of 6%, let us have 2% left aside for long-term purposes, which will be a long-term strategy chalked out by a body of experts, which cannot be amended by from an election to election kind of syndrome. I mean it, because nothing of this will really work. This educational transformation is not a 4-month or a 1 year. So let at least some part be identified for long-term strategy. And that body must contain, again, unfortunately, it is so, that it must contain various political parties. Let them put their brains together, come out a long term, and then that should not be dabbled with year on year. The remaining part, you can have whatever. That's just a suggestion.
I think it's time we should do justice to our ambition of being, pursuing gender parity and also being sensitive, apart from, of course, the subject domain expertise. Professor Ananya Mukherjee is an economist, and currently she was trained from Jadavpur University in the beginning, and she's currently heading the Shiv Nadar University, one of the recent and a very prominent university in the country. And please note that in this panel, Professor Partha Chakravarti is sitting because he headed a panel discussion. But in the panel for today, we have invited purposely 2 vice chancellors from the private university sectors, because I personally believe very strongly that that kind of a voice is not being heard very carefully and seriously. So Professor Mukherjee has recently joined. She carries a vast experience of being a professor in a Canadian university for a long time. So she brings some very different perspective to this room. So over to you, Professor Mukherjee.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kasturirangan and Professor Manna and all of you here. It was such a great experience for me to hear all of you. As Professor Manna was saying, I left India 30 years ago and then came back basically with this assignment because I was very excited by the opportunity of being able to head a new university, and I've been following all of the changes around the new education policy, the discussion that was going on, particularly around the gender and inclusion issue. So I'll just say very few things. One is what was really heartening here for me today. I heard from everybody that our the implementation of the NEP is not just about creating pockets of excellence, but by diffusing excellence to every corner of the country as much as we can. And also to identify wherever talent is in rural, remote areas or in transformational areas, migration areas, and to try and nurture that. So that is an extremely valuable part of what the NEP can achieve. Now, I would like to talk a little bit about the private higher education institution, but maybe we don't have time too much today. So let me go back to the gender equity issue, which was raised in your first panel, and then we talked about it a little bit, but I think we need to bring it back front and center. So as you said, Professor Chakravarti, that this is an engineering challenge, the implementation of NEP, I would say this for inclusion of gender equity and all kinds of equity, this is a multidisciplinary challenge, and we need to have a specific implementation plan. It's not going to happen without that. And this is not the problem of gender equity in STEM is a global problem. Nobody has solved it. But I have hope for many reasons that India can provide leadership in the solution. And why do I have that hope? Because in India, women have had a role in education forever, has a very strong role in education, which is not known globally. We should make it known globally. And also because India has a very large number of women who graduate in STEM. And then something happens, and the transformation of institutions in nurturing women leaders does not happen. And here, as in every country in India also, we've identified one problem, which is access, that how can we bring more, but access is only one step. No country has solved the problem of gender equity just through access. So there is a next step, which is not only having more women in the institutions, but changing the institutions, the culture, organizational fabric of the institutions, in a way that gender equity becomes normalized. It's not something we have to do specially, that it happens. And even if there are 3 women or 4 women, the culture is an inclusive culture, so that the inclusivity is translated multi-generationally. And I really think that in India we have the opportunity to do that, because there's a huge consciousness about that. There are stellar women leaders. It is just I think, the determination for the implementation, and that's where, the focus on implementation is very important. We can debate how good a policy is or not, but the real test is in the implementation. So that's where I would, if there are opportunities where we can approach this as a really multidisciplinary social issue that private, public institutions, industry, the regulatory authorities, everybody would like to come together to solve, I think that would be a wonderful thing for us to do. And I really, having lived outside India for 30 years, I would think that we are at a time where we can take the leadership, and we should want to do so. And I think the NEP provides a very good framework for us to be able to do that. So I'll stop there, and then we can talk later. Yeah.
But we spend a lot of time discussing these questions of equity, not only with respect to even the domestic issues that in India, those are also equally important, the schooling education, and then the access part of it. Then the inability for a qualified woman or a girl to take up a job because of family constraint. Then when husbands and wife are working together, do they get the same place to work, or they have to separate out? These are kind of things, they're multifarious issues. So what you said is absolutely true. We have considered them, but when it comes to engineering, there is another important thing. If you look at the number of graduates coming out of IIT, and look at the number of youngsters, and look at the number of graduates in a typical university like medical university, the number is quite clear that you hardly see a girl coming and receiving a gold medal from IIT. But the last time, 75% of a university which I attended the convocation were all girls. So there is something that is the choice of the areas, engineering particularly, doesn't seem to be finding favor for whatever reason. Good to know why.
Yeah.
Sir, I can share a small experiment which is
Yeah.
very successful.
Use the microphone.
About 5 years ago, in the undergraduate in the IITs, percentage of ladies was 8%. Then we did a study. About 3 directors and some other people did a study. We found out that there are difficult problems. That means they said that the women did not get good ranks. But our study showed that those who entered, their performance was much better than the male. So then we came out with a proposal that we will increase it by affirmative action to 20% over 5 years. There was huge resistance because people said, JE ranks, why will we allow seats to go only to ladies? People spend thousands of rupees getting coaching, etc. So we put in extra seats. There was huge hue and cry. Today we are close to 20%. And today our new study has shown, as we just pointed out, that the medals are also going to the girls. So this is a small experiment which has taken it to 20% in 5 years.
So just to add, Professor Rohini Godbole made a very interesting observation. According to her, what is needed is not necessarily, I mean, in order to achieve gender parity, what we first need is sensitivity in the society, in the system, not necessarily in the institutions. The society has to be sensitive and be respectful. The other observation is even more interesting. She feels that we have very few leaders or very few women in the leadership position. So they are not, seen as role model. So we probably will have to create a system whereby many more leaders like Professor Mukherjee will be, be seen in the leadership position. So now Professor Vaidya Subramaniam.
You know, we have at the Indian Academy of Sciences, Indian National Academy, INSA, as well as the National Academy of Sciences, there is a common committee which looks into the affairs of the gender parity and related issues which the women face in the science and technology. Is INAE a part of it or not?
No, sir, good that you asked me this question. I many times tell them, because I have the privilege of, like many of us here, have the privilege of being in all those academies. somehow there is a mental block against engineers. I don't know what is that.
It has been raised by a very eminent woman.
Right.
I think you should consider this before we discuss the role of engineering for women. First of all,
Right.
they should recognize the role.
Yeah.
Greetings to all. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm just going to take 5 minutes, and thanks for ensuring that the representation of the private higher education ecosystem is also pronounced here. The Professor Jagdish Kumar made a very valid opening remark that, if we had the same meeting 10 years back, we'd still have the same set of discussion points. And that I actually also share the same joke that, the 12th, the first draft of the 12th 5-year plan will be like the 12th draft of the first 5-year plan. We'll keep on, talking about the same problems. But then, every system, every country will have its own problem. And NEP 2020 will also have a lot of problems. So that doesn't make it a problematic policy, but then we have to jump into action. So, there are many macro points and micro points, and I'm just parking many of them within myself, but sharing only a few, and maybe later I can share more. The first thing is Professor Pandit made a very valid observation, and that's precisely why I also felt, just like in economics, you have the Gini coefficient that measures, inequality in wealth distribution. I have a very strong feeling that there is also this academic Gini coefficient in our higher education ecosystem, but where there is inequality in policy, implementation, and all sorts of things that are associated with higher education ecosystem across different types of institutions. And that has to be realized, because the moment this NEP 2020 was announced, there is a lot of excitement that is generating a lot of traffic amongst higher education institutions, and all of them claiming that I am following NEP 20, I am following NEP 2020. But that's only intellectual paratrooping and saying that I am following it. But when you go and measure the realistic foot soldiering inside the campus, very marginal efforts across institutions of different types. And that's why, we have to internalize the situation to see what are all those, low-hanging fruits that can be implemented in certain types of institutions? What are those mid to upper in certain types of institutions? And what are those real big-ticket items in certain types of institutions? So that will address this academic Gini that's already prevailing, and we cannot fix that. It's impossible to fix that. But at least we can, at least from the implementation point of view, we can clearly know what are all the targeted items that have to be put in place in certain types of institutions. And that has to come from the regulatory bodies also, where, policies also have to be universalized and make sure that, there is equity in policy and implementation as well. That's point number one from a very macro point of view. Just 3 limited micro viewpoints. One, Professor Chakravarti mentioned about the teaching ecosystem, technical teachers, considering the vastness of the technical education ecosystem, it's a big challenge. And I am also now part of a committee that's discussing on the revamping of the NITTTRs, which are supposed to actually train technical teachers. But looking at the outcome that they have generated, apart from the absolute volume and the number of certifications that have been rolled out, if you really measure the learning outcome of those training programs, very, very incremental, I should say, very marginal in its outcome. Rather, we need certain programs that are actually aligned towards engineering education itself. We don't have degree programs in India. Even if we have, they are very few. There was an attempt that was made, but then somehow they did not really kickstart with a multiplier effect. So I think that in implementation of this type, and where technical teacher education is a big challenge, we'll have to think big actually. We should maybe create a pool of competent engineering education specialists as teachers who will understand the systems problem and all of these that we have discussed. Maybe one cohort specially trained as part of the Stanford 2025, which they have a wonderful open loop university. So that's something that we should actually bring back and we can customize it to an Indian context, and Stanford is not going to say no if we are going to come and say we have 500 selected teachers across institutions who will come and finish a one-year program there, or go to Virginia Tech where they have a specialized engineering education program. And likewise select 100 institutions in the country for the next 5 years. In each of these 100 institutions, 50 master's program in engineering education or 5-year integrated program in engineering education. Roll it out, let the government fund it. And this is an investment, because investing on technical teacher education has not really happened so much, except for these small nuggets of budgetary allocations on training programs, certifications and all of that. That's really not adding value at all. The third in the implementation is about internationalization. Now internationalization is not just about movement of physical persons, students or faculty. I have a slightly different viewpoint which also accommodates another variety in the internationalization. We talk about 6% of GDP, and we've been doing this for the last 10, 15, 20 years. And I'm not an economist, but I'm just a trespasser into economics. But if you look at the tax GDP ratio, it's roughly around 18%, max 20%. We need money for defense, we need money for airport, ports, highways, and all other strategic sectors. So 6% of GDP is a very tall order, in my humble opinion. But at the same time, the role of private institutions is also address this issue, that it's not fully relying on government to invest in the social sector. But how can we create a small change in this to ensure that the outcome of the 6% of GDP is still achievable? HIFA and all other types of funding mechanisms are restricted to CFTIs and central institutions. I've been writing on this article repeatedly, that we need to look at an alternate funding mechanism that gives special access to foreign denominated currency loans available at very low interest rates, or multilateral agencies like banks, ADB or World Bank or other multilateral agencies, where they are ready to give money, provided that there is a kind of a consortia-based approach that also involves private institutions, because access to that fund, which is dollar denominated, is also an international component of the internationalization that we are saying, because priority sector lending in India is only for student loans education, not for infrastructure spent by education institutions. So there is already kind of a crowding out of capital for education institutions to really progress the way in which NEP 2020 wants us to. So there is one approach where we can get access to this, and the government can be giving supporting help by giving a sovereign or maybe a letter of comfort guarantee to these types of special soft loans to deserving institutions, public and private, top 100, and that way we can also have an international component besides physical mobility of persons. The fourth is about vocational education. So I've always felt that there are enough people that's available in our country where universities must be empowered to run behind those people and first give them the degrees first. You should not ask them to come and sit in these campuses. They already know what they are doing. So universities have to be empowered, and you have to give them the degrees, because that's really bringing out a social change in their identity itself, and that's going to make a lot of difference for them in their ambitions and aspirations. But having said that, that's not the model I'm suggesting. Today, vocational education can be delivered in a phygital mode. People have been talking about digital online, but the Tata chairman, Mr. Chandrasekharan's new coinage is phygital education. And today it is possible to roll out a vocational education program by universities in partnership with economic business clusters in and around that university area. You have vibrant economic business clusters almost in every major town across the country. So we have that last mile connectivity to provide these types of degree programs, not necessarily inside a classroom, but in a phygital mode, and models of engagement are available, and we have to have that freedom to start experimenting that and kind of destigmatize this vocational education as though it's the resort for the dropouts or for those flunkies, and kind of rebrand it because that's where the real skill set is hiding, and we'll have to empower universities and give an academic identity to the vocational ability that they already have with them. So these are my limited points that I wanted to make, and there's more that I can make, but in the interest of time, I'll just stop here. But then I'll be very glad to continue later the next opportunity. Thank you.
You said a very good point about we have to change the stigmatization of the academic vocational education. That is precisely what our recommendation we have made, is to bring the BVOC into as an undergraduate program in higher institutes. The most important thing is that they are given a stature because of the holisticity and integrity. This will be major minor concepts that are there in the regular education, if a 4-year program, for example. This will be also a 4-year program, going through the same professors and where the subjects are chosen in a way in which they are experts, whether they teach the BTech or whether they go with the BVOC. So ultimately, the products that come out, and we have said use the same yardstick for teachers also. Teachers in the higher educational institution. The teacher preparations are taken out from the TIEs and all those kind of a thing, which has created enough problems in the country. So we have moved that also to the higher education. Both these are major transitions that will happen in preparing the appropriate professions. One is teacher and the other is for the vocational education. We think many of the engineering institutions will adopt this and then start moving in this direction. That is the question. The stigmatization is not only in the society. Many times the institutions themselves think that teaching them on the vocational education is below the kind of thing that what they would like to give as an image of that institute. But I think we need to get rid of that kind of a thing with areas like artificial intelligence, expert systems, virtual reality, and that is part of the vocational education. It is no longer the question of a carpenter and a screwdriver, a building fellow. It's much more than that today. And I think in terms of parity, one can certainly have to prepare these youngsters into vocational education through a much higher standards of education prior to that. So we have taken care of it. The question is implementation.
Just one point I wanted to add about the phygital part and what Professor Chakravarti mentioned about using the digital approach. Actually, there is already infrastructure in place with the BharatNet program, which is supposed to take fiber optics up to every panchayat in the country. Okay, so it's a well laid out program. If the government really, and this NEP is directly connected to that in that sense, give a new thrust to it and see that I have found in villages the fiber has come, but there nothing beyond that, right? So if now that fiber is reserved for only 2 areas, education and health, that's it. And for that, create that at the end of the fiber, you will have wonders happening because they are all in villages and all this education can be really imparted in that way. Thank you.
See, in this country, we have certain paradoxes which are very typical of ours. One of them is like in India, there is no dearth of good rules and regulations. Implementation always is the weakest link. We are a country where we produce more number of graduate engineers than the number of diploma or certificate holders. I think this is one part I'm sure, Professor Kumar, you may like to look into. During our time, those who used to collect diploma or ITI certificates, today all of them, or those days, if the same situation prevailed, would have collected BTech degrees. It doesn't make sense to produce 1.5 million engineers graduating or have so much of capacity. Maybe we need a bit of a review of that, how much we exactly need, and that's where the quality suffers, and then we lose the credibility and industry complaints. So at this moment, I would like to, sir, today, actually, it is going to be 100% attendance with Dr. D.K. Sharma. Can you connect to him? From Ministry of Education, he is a director connected with NEP and related matters.
Good evening to all dignitaries and distinguished academicians. Sir, unfortunately, due to preoccupation of secretary and additional secretary, they could not attend today's meeting. And it's my fortune that I am here and listening to the distinguished persons. So, sir, I am handling the work related to implementation of NEP. So I have got it was my fortune that I have learned a lot of things, got details of insights with regard to various aspects of implementation of NEP. It's always mesmerizing to listen to Dr. Kasturi Rangan sir. He had taught us ABC of the NEP right from the draft NEP stage. And we in the ministry have privileged to seek guidance of Kasturi Rangan sir, Chairman UGC sir, Chairman AICT sir. However, today's deliberation, we have got lot of information and insights with regard to various aspects of implementation of NEP, and it will be very, very useful for all of us in the ministry. So it will be of great help, sir, if today's presentations are shared with us, so that we can utilize those details with regard to various aspects of implementation of NEP. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sharma. Please convey to the Secretary Higher Education, Mr. Sanjay Murthy, and also to Additional Secretary Vinit Joshi, that we have had truly an outstanding panel here, and I don't think we could have thought of or imagined anything better than this with not only Dr. Kasturi at the helm, but also three very eminent industry peers, two vice chancellors from private institutions, then Chairman UGC, Chairman AICT, Secretary ACRB, and 5 directors of IITs and ISC. I mean, there cannot be anything better than this. So, anyway, sir, we are going to close, but before that, Professor Punendu Ghosh, you have been very patiently listening. So please.
I will be so brief that you will not complain, you know. Basically, I am rephrasing 3 observations in 3 sentences. The first observation is, things are moving much faster than the people, because it is easier to remain at the same place. Genes have not changed, but society has changed. We can talk about this thing for a very, very long time, but since we have only 2 minutes, and second observation you made is, dustbin of some institutions are better than classrooms of most institutions. And third observation is, third sentence is, we have to learn how to think beyond IIT. These are 3 observations. Thank you.
Very succinct and very profound. And probably Professor Ghosh has made the shortest statement I have ever heard from him. Now, sir, let me also...
I am rarely given an opportunity.
No, actually, sir, I must tell you that they are part of the think tank through which this entire proposal came up. So the Apex committee comprises the president, the 3 vice presidents, the chief editor, and the immediate former president. Now, let me also share with you, and I purposely didn't mention, 2 characters other than the INAE head office were common in all the 5 satellite events and today's event. One is Shivaji Chakravarti, the other one is Indranil Manna. So we haven't heard Shivaji Chakravarti as yet. He attended all the satellite events, took notes, and shared with me.
Yeah, yes, sir. Actually, at this point of time, my duty is not to make comments, but I heard for 3.5 hours very distinguished people, and I have taken notes, detailed notes, and definitely I will share with Professor Manna, as I have done during all the 5 satellite events, where PPC and others discussed for very long time. But I enjoyed the whole thing, starting from 13th of this month, culminating on today. And definitely, sir, there will be some positive outcome of this entire initiative led by President of INAE this time. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
To make a brief comment, in IIT system, we have developed so many good practices, but somehow they don't percolate into our university system, and that is where our focus should be. So what we are doing from UGC is invite the directors of some of the IITs and IISc and make a lecture, give a lecture on how they reach the stage that they are in now. And we can communicate to 45,000 colleges and 1,100 universities using our social media platforms. Thousands of people will attend. So the first director, the director of IISc is going to give the first lecture to thousands of these university community. And from UGC side, we would like to work with you. And if you can lend some experts from INAE, we will be very, very glad to arrange lectures to the entire university and college community.
I'm very glad you mentioned this. INAE actually nurtures something called expert pool. And in fact, that is one initiative which hasn't fetched the kind of result we wanted. We want to throw open the entire talent pool under INAE, about 1,000 topmost engineers and technologies of the country drawn from academia, industry and R&D. So I'll talk to you about that.
We have this distinguished fellow who,
right.
The colleges,
AICT, with AICT we run a program, Distinguished Visiting Professors. Right. So I think, sir, with your permission, now we'll come to a close. We thought of until 7:30, and it is just about. Yeah.
This is more on behalf of all of them, and on my personal, I have to thank you for this excellent initiative. I think it is one of its kind so far I have seen, and it has a it will have a great impact on the way NEP will be handled. And with both of the veterans for implementation being here, and most of the other people who are integral part of a stakeholding of this area, I think it's going to be a very major impact. I would like to congratulate you and you have a passion for education, and you have also continuously followed up many areas of engineering, and with your presidentship of INAE, I'm sure INAE will benefit, NEP will benefit, and the country will benefit. There is no question.
Sir, it was my turn to thank you. No, actually, I really mean it that, in metallurgy, we often talk about magnetic materials. For particles to stick to a surface, you need a magnet. And there's no doubt today the magnet is Dr. Kasturi Rangan. Otherwise, we wouldn't have managed this galaxy of panel for this discussion. Imagine Chairman UGC, Chairman AICT, all these directors, Vice Chancellors, all of them sitting here. Many of them have come just at 4 o'clock and straight came to this room and are still sitting. Dr. Goel is going to go back tonight and will reach his home at 3 o'clock in the morning. So look at the kind of commitment. And last thing I must, sir, with your permission, I want to share with you all, this though a personal information. Can anybody imagine how old is Dr. Kasturi Rangan? He's 82. And still he's sitting and without any complaint. He's so passionate about NEP. I think it's our sacred duty to make sure that NEP 2020 not only is implemented, but fetches the desired goal. So with this ambition, let's end today. Thank all of you. And please do not leave without having dinner with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Group photograph.